Teachers, when did karmic justice finally come to that one troublesome student? Had one who was a real monster of a kid when I taught 5th. This kid, let's call him Ray, had one of those mums who refused to hold him accountable for anything. It was always some other kid did it, or Ray was just protecting himself, Ray just wanted to fit in, Ray was being targeted. Also, she was one of those mums who'd ask Ray if he were guilty and take his no as incontestable truth. She'd say, "My son doesn't lie to me." "Oh really? Your kid doesn't lie? So it's just your kid and Jesus." "All kids lie, lady." Anyway, I had a full caseload as a special ed teacher, so I got a paraprofessional, let's call him Steve. Ray hated Steve, had some kind of issue with male authority figures. One day, Ray got in trouble, coming back from recess, and Steve reprimanded him verbally. By the time Ray makes it to the classroom, he's saying how Steve got in his face and shouted at him. Nope. He asks to go talk to the principal. Yay, Ray's gone for at least 5 minutes. Tells the principal how Steve grabbed his arm. When Mum comes in and gets him, now he's saying Steve pushed him. Next day, we get a phone call. Ray's mum and grandma are coming in and want a meeting with Steve and the principal to discuss how Steve choked Ray. Steve's freaking out. Sure, other kids were there, but no adults and no cameras. How can he prove his innocence? I tell him, go to the meeting and before anyone says anything, have Ray share what happened. Steve came back smiling. As soon as one story came out, everyone else was disagreeing. Well, Ray told me? Oh, but Ray told me? I would have loved to see the mum's face as her kid is proven a liar in front of everyone. Had a kid that threw a lock at my head not get expelled because it just slipped out of her hand. She then got expelled a few months later for bringing a weapon to school. We should really ban assault locks. No student needs a lock with more than 3 combinations. I'm not a teacher, but one time when I was at kindergarten, a kid looked me straight in the eyes, bit himself on the wrist hard, ran to the teacher and blamed me, that little C word. They sent me to the principal's office, my mum was called down and I got yelled at and cried. A week later, the kid did it again, and the teacher saw him do it. Felt so good to have the principal apologize profusely to me while that little craphead got a mouthful from his parents. I teach college students to be teachers. My first year doing this, I had a student who was always late, turned in the bare minimum of work and always had excuses. I told him he had to improve because if he did this on the job, he'd get fired. He kept coasting and the other profs let him get by. First teaching job? He got fired. I laughed in the privacy of my office and I'm not sorry. Oh no, the consequences of my actions. Seriously, I always wonder how these kids from university who don't seem capable of basic coordination or effort get on in life. Do some of them reform? Because honestly, this seems like the natural resolution, followed by them never holding down a job. I hope some of them get their crap together. We had these 2 kids, a brother-sister combo with fabulous names. Let's call them Princess and Major. Actually, not bad kids, just a bit lazy. But the parents were the laziest Fs in town. Did anything to not work, just sat around and existed. I'm surprised they had the motivation to get off their butts and procreate twice. Anyways, there was always some excuse why homework wasn't done, and this was 4th grade in a city. So homework was stuff like reading a little booklet to your parents or practicing multiplication facts. The kids also missed school all the time. The kids were honest. Mummy didn't want to wake up and get us ready for the bus. Daddy was up late with his friends. So, we report them to truancy. The parents turn around and find some lawyer to sue the school for their kids' underachievement. If the teachers were doing their jobs, these precious children would be pre-med students by now. Luckily, we kept really good records. The lawyer shows up, the principal, superintendent, truancy officer, and our lawyer. Their lawyer starts in, but our principal breaks in, holding up his hand. He asks the truancy officer how many days have these children missed. Turns out they'd missed enough days in the last 3 years to equate for more than a year of school. The principal says, "Now, ma'am, sir, how are we supposed to deliver a quality education to your children if you don't get them to school?" Their lawyer quietly packed up her crap and left. I interned in a class with this one kid who always thought he was smarter than everyone else. He was pretty smart, but not by too much. He always got paired with kids not as smart as him, so he'd always be really smug when dealing with them. We learned that he got that from his parents during a parent-teacher conference. His parents praised that boy up and down and thought he was the smartest kid in school. They built him up as that and they got him thinking that too. Then they went off on my mentor teacher. That she wasn't providing him with a high enough education, she was bringing him down, she was terrible. The conference ended when my mentor teacher left the room crying after the verbal lashing. Well, about a week later, there was an event where parents came to watch their children in class. It was to watch them do math games with other students. Well, my mentor teacher paired this smug little jerk with the actual smartest kid in class, the one who was working on more advanced classes after school. The kid got shamed. His parents were so flustered during the event, they were visibly nervous and upset looking as this kid got destroyed game after game. They left before it was all done and took him out of school for the rest of the day. I coached middle school football. Some kids have come out of their shell by the time they get there, others have not. But at least most of the early bloomers were jerks and made life hell for everyone. The team's starting halfback was one of these jerks. He gave a defensive lineman hell, and since everyone thought he was cool, they just gave him hell right along with him. The lineman was a big guy, but not aggressive or outgoing. Still just in his shell, really. He did fine out there because he was a big guy, but hardly played to his potential. The little running backs took their Napoleon complexes out on the big guy by running by him and shouting, "Pansy!" every time he failed to stop them. Rather than fight back to make the play, he'd just ignore it and line up and try again the next play. One day, the whole thing just clicked for the big guy and he started making plays. He learned to get off his blockers and form tackle and attack the ball carrier. It was a cool thing to see. He loved it. When he really started getting into a groove, I started running the jerk halfback right at the blooming D lineman and watched him plant that guy in the ground with a thud every time. It was just getting easier as I made sure they ran the same play as him, play after play. Soon, bruised and beaten, the jerk halfback asked, "How many times are you going to run this play?" And I responded, "Once for every time you called him a pansy." First grade here, had a boy that wouldn't stop hitting kids with basketballs. He'd run up and pop the ball right at students. Sometimes he'd toss it real fast and say catch, but most often he'd just throw it at children on the playground who were completely unaware. This kid seemed like he was trying to knock other children down. He'd laugh his butt off if he saw someone stumble or fall after they were hit by his basketball. After talking with his parents, we told them we'd be taking the balls away from him until after the spring break to see if his behavior improved. As promised, he was allowed to play basketball again after break, but we warned he'd better behave. It didn't even take 5 minutes before he stalked and shot that Spalding special at this poor little girl, knocking her down. She cried and pointed at him, mulch dangling from her hair. "He's mean, Mrs. Misty." I agreed and told her he'd have the basketballs taken away for the rest of the school year. As I got up and walked his way, he started to bolt. He ran out of the playground, past the sandpit, and onto the basketball court. He maintained eye contact with me, and before I could take another step, a stray ball from a 5th grader hit the edge of the backboard, bounced off, and hit that little jerk square in the face. He went down like a sack of potatoes. Of course, I ran over to him and made sure he was okay. He might be acting like a little turd, but he's still just a child. I called for the nurse, since he was out cold. He woke up with me above him and started crying, saying he'd never do it again. "Please. I'm sorry, I won't do it again." I'll have to wait and see this coming year if Karma kicked his butt enough or not, because he didn't want to pick up another basketball for the rest of the school year. I mean, I credit him with being able to put 2 and 2 together that this was what it felt like when he inflicted it on other kids. Normally, people present a breathtaking lack of understanding of the irony of these situations. But wait, did he think that this was a targeted hit that the teacher arranged to happen? Because if so, that's a little bit darkly hilarious. I had a 5th grader who looked like a white version of Cleveland Brown Jr., right down to the hanging cheeks and no neck. This kid was a know-it-all menace. He'd interrupt me, do that weird Rihanna hand twirl and say, "Well, actually, miss," and then state some random fact that was often wrong or irrelevant. Well, eventually, while on lunch duty, I saw that his lunch every day was a can of soda, a big bag of chips, and tons of candy. Like the bag is bursting at the seams. I alert the principal because I'm worried that his grandmother, who was raising him, wasn't feeding him properly. Principal calls the grandma and the grandma gets angry. She was letting him pack his own lunch and wasn't checking it. So she's embarrassed that we've called her on it. She tells us that she'll only pack healthy food now. She then tells us that the kid's doctor said he needs a serious diet change. She tells us he can't have any candy. Cue to a week later, the kid is still being a little brat and annoys another student. The student runs to principal and says the kid has been sneaking candy to school every day. The principal goes to talk to him, the kid shoves a chocolate bar in his mouth, and the principal takes away the blow pop sucker that he has. The kid proceeds to roll around on his belly across the entire hallway, screeching and crying so hard that he's choking on the half-chewed chocolate bar. Chocolate spittle and tears are everywhere. A kindergarten student walks by and says, "You look like a baby." The kid stops wallowing long enough to punch the little student. He got suspended for violence, and I got a peaceful classroom. Freshman English. Busted a kid for plagiarism, he was furious and refused to drop the course. I gave him a second chance, and he continued to plagiarize. He was a slimy, smarmy kid who thought I was just a dumb, clueless teacher's assistant, but joke's on him, he ended up failing the course 3 ways: plagiarizing, exceeding absences, and failing to turn in a complete final. You can argue about 1 way to get an F, but you can't argue about 3. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Last year I had a 7-year-old in my class who was just a pain. He's the only child I've ever taught who I've actually disliked. He'd throw things around the classroom, pinch other children, stab them with pencils. He was rude to everyone and would always blame it on someone else. Talking to his parents wouldn't help because they believed everything he said, even over adults who had actually witnessed him doing it. They'd give excuses and say that other children were blaming him or that he was being picked on. There was nothing wrong with this child other than that he had been brought up with no consequences in his life. Anyway, one time he was harassing another child, and I guess they'd just had enough, and this usually mild-mannered kid punched him in the stomach, causing the horrible one to wet himself. When following the incident up, all of the other children who'd witnessed it, about 5 or 6 of them, completely closed ranks and denied that it had ever happened. I don't usually condone when children hit back, it causes so many problems, but you had better believe that all the adults that had had to deal with this kid were rooting for the retaliator. I was in pre-kindergarten in the early 80s at a private Catholic school. This one kid, Amy, would always bite the other kids. I don't remember exactly how it went down, but I guess one day I came home crying or had a really bad bite mark or something and my mum was angry. She took me straight to the superintendent, not the principal, and showed her what happened. The superintendent, a really old nun, did not put up with that crap. She called Amy into her office and bit the frick out of her arm. Amy started crying, but she never bit anyone ever again. Old nuns in the 80s were hardcore. I'm not saying that what happened was right, just that it happened. College instructor here, I was teaching English 102. This little smart aleck kid was on a sports team as a student manager, and this was his life. He lived to pick up jock straps and clean lockers and all that. Well, anyway, that's fine, and I was happy for him. He sat in the front row and was always talking about stuff that happened with the team, or he was fiddling with his phone and iPod. Sometimes he was doing all of these things. He was a bit scattered. At this point, I was never really angry with him, just concerned. He was way too cool to actually do work when I gave the class time to work on their papers, and he decided he didn't need the book. I told him many times he needed to buckle down and get going. He didn't. For over half the semester, he'd just get up and leave class 15 minutes in if he decided he didn't want to stay. He'd make any class discussion hell for everyone else because he couldn't for some reason follow the thread of conversation and would ask inane questions. He was also kinda sexist and was always talking about various ways he'd cheated in classes or helped other people cheat. He was incredibly friendly though. I told him many times he shouldn't discuss these kinds of things in front of a teacher. So finally, I was telling the class that the last day to drop is tomorrow and blah blah blah. He comes up to me after class and asks if he should drop. I look at his grade, which is an abomination, and tell him, yes, I think the best course of action would be for him to drop. Well, he stopped coming to class, but he never dropped. I gave him an F. He sent me an email with a frowny face with lots of parentheses as the downturned mouth. I was teaching music. I had a flutist who was fantastic. He practiced 4 hours every day and wanted to be the next James Galway, the guy who does the fluty Shire theme in Lord of the Rings. Unfortunately, he had an ego the size of Texas. He told the girl next to him, who also wanted to be a professional flutist, that she was abysmal and a waste of life. He refused to audition for our local honor band, which was part of his grade, because he refused to lower himself to playing with such talentless musicians. He'd whine about my conducting in class when I wouldn't cue him, because I was too busy cueing the low brass who needed help with their entrances. You know, teaching instead of just letting him show off. He refused to play a theme from a popular video game at a concert, something that we play to get people to attend because we need money to keep the program going. It was apparently not artistic enough. Then he refused to show up to a concert because he was too embarrassed to be seen performing with this high school band. So he failed band and I kicked the toxic little monster out. But he was talented and he wanted to be a flutist, so he auditioned for Juilliard and made it in. This absolute dillweed quits before the first semester is over because he believed he was more talented than his teachers. He earned a symphony gig in a very well-known band thanks to a blind audition where he wasn't permitted to talk and reveal how much of a D-bag he was. That lasted 2 weeks before he dissed the very famous conductor's conducting and got his butt fired. His career is dead because he couldn't keep his ego in check, and I find it immensely satisfying. As usual, my policy is that you can forgive kids a certain amount of awful behavior because generally they grow up and cringe when they realize how terrible they were and learn from their mistakes. But this guy got multiple extra chances, plus more that our author likely didn't know about, and blew all of them, and apparently never stopped to question whether he was in fact the issue here. When I was younger, the teacher got tired of the kid who kept disrupting class, and she gave extra homework to everyone in the class except this kid and made all the students write, "Thanks for the extra homework," kid's name. Somehow, he stopped believing he was cool after that. I taught a comparative anatomy animal dissection lab section back in college. I had one kid write in a section, let's call him Kevin, who never listened to dissection instructions and just dove in with a scalpel, dicing and chopping and generally mutilating most of the internal organs. His first karmic warning came when we were dissecting squid, and he got squid juice on himself. Smelled awful for the rest of that class. However, he kept ignoring instructions and hacking away, and this time, karmic justice struck on our very last dissection project, the fetal pig. Kevin really wanted to see the pig's brain. Kevin couldn't get through the skull, so he started whacking away at it with the butt of a flat pry knife. I told him to stop, but he had to give it one last mighty whack. Crack! The skull breaks and the rubbery piglet brain bits come flying out of everywhere, mostly over Kevin, splattering him. Unfortunately, while protesting my refusal to let him dice this piglet into pancetta cubes, Kevin had his mouth open. Thankfully, preserved pig brain, ingested orally, seemed to have a calming, subduing effect on Kevin for the last couple of classes. In short, don't jerk into sections unless you're willing to swallow. I once taught a grade 11 history class where I had one kid who caused me a lot of grief. He was frequently late, walking in 20 to 30 minutes each time. Class was during C slot, so he had a spare during B and would actually take the bus home after his A class and simply stay home for an hour, or just not show up at all. Additionally, he was super passive-aggressive, rarely handed anything in, and obsessed himself with spending time on his super expensive smartwatch and/or phone, which is also somewhat more of a big deal as my school is in a low middle-income area and more than half of the students can't even afford a simple phone. Anyway, I'd pretty much had it with him. A major project comes up halfway through and he doesn't bother to do any of the group work. I weight projects around 50-50 personal input versus group mark, and then he didn't show up for the entire week of presentations. I'd had a lot of conversations with Mum at this point, who luckily had my back and was totally fed up with him too. Suffice to say, I gave him the only 0 in the class. So, of course, he hasn't learned and his grades are below failing mark. Test on the last unit before the exam is coming up, and I give the students the option to write a unit test and replace their lowest test grade with it. Obviously, every kid takes the chance. He saunters in late, and when I asked if he's going to do the op test, he just said, "Nope," sat down and played on his phone. I was a bit dumbfounded, but whatever. Oh, and I forgot this part. He came into class a few days later when I was handing back tests and announces, "I'm ready for my retest now, Mr. Hardshank." I looked at him and said how he could possibly think that's an option, especially as I'm in the middle of handing out the answers. He says, "Oh, well, I just thought I could write at any time." What? How could you get that idea? I say. "Oh well, you're too late. How does it feel when you shoot yourself in the foot? Hurts, I guess, huh?" Later I tell him he has until the last day of classes to hand in any missed work, of which he has lots. Some of which he hands in 50% finished at best, but that's it. Too bad. Obviously he fails his exam and ends up with like a 45% or something. I could have failed him harder, but earlier group projects didn't have a personal input weighting like the last one did. My bad. Here's the justice. He comes to my room literally begging me to give him a passing grade. Looks like he's ready to cry. How can I fail him? All of the other teachers failed him too. Can't I at least give him a passing grade so he gets 1 credit? I hella noped. Basically said it's time to lay in the bed you made for yourself and told him he can see himself out. It was satisfying. In short, a super lazy, apathetic kid gets an F in my class, and that's not the worst of his problems. In high school, we had this little bag of crap named Brandon. I only had one class with him, but that class is where the story happened. It was 11th grade geography, and our teacher was one of the nicer teachers I can remember. Brandon would always push her buttons like I'm sure he did to everyone. He'd never take it too far. I think he just loved the attention of getting the whole class to look at him or laugh at what he was doing. He'd make stupid little noises, tell stupid jokes during lecture, pretend to sleep and snore, or any other stupid irritating crap that you could think of. Our teacher, she was quite a patient lady, but you could tell by mid-year that she had had about enough of this crap as anyone. She couldn't really even punish him because Brandon loved that kind of attention and it made him all the happier. The few times he got too much, she'd give him detention and a couple of times sent him to the office, which just made him more giddy. We had very tame office staff and they'd keep him in the office for an hour or something and then just let him out. She tried everything and you could tell she was at the end of her wits. A few weeks after September 11th, some kid thought it would be funny to call in a bomb threat. They cleared the school and went locker by locker. They found nothing, of course, and we went back in. As soon as we sat down in that geography class, an office staff member came into our class, went up to our teacher and whispered something in her ear. I still remember the calm look on her face. In the most professional way, she looked over at Brandon and said, "You're being called into the office." She went on with the rest of the class completely normally. They'd found quite a bit of green herb in Brandon's locker, and as a result, he was expelled over it. I teach kindergarten and had a terrible, terrible child in my class last year. He liked to pull his desk away from the girl sitting across from him so her pencils and crayons would go falling on the floor. Finally, one day she got fed up and slammed her desk back into his. Unfortunately for him, his fingers happened to be there. I had to resist the urge to be like, "That's what you get!" But instead I just reminded him that's why I said not to move his desk away from the rest of the table and sent him to the nurse. What crazy self-own did a patient try to pretend wasn't their fault? An Elder Wand replica, as in the Elder Wand from Harry Potter. It was jammed right up their rear end. I really had to resist asking whether they'd tried Accio Wand. I used to work psych and we had this regular patient who we all knew quite well. Schizophrenia, paranoid kind of thing. He was always complaining about spider eggs in his brain. One time, upon admission, he complained that his butt was hurting because he sent a rat up there to retrieve a message. Of course, no one believed him, but we had to check anyway. Sure enough, there was a rat tail hanging out of his rectum. The patient's biggest concern was that he got the important message from the rat, who was, of course, dead and also non-verbal regardless, we presume. On Thanksgiving, I had a pain almost literally inside my butt, but more towards my perineum. Ingrown hair, abscess kind of thing. I went to the ER since it was a holiday and I could hardly sit. When they asked what the issue was and where it was located, I said, "In a sensitive area." When they pressed further, I said, "My perineum." "Oh," the nurse replied, "you mean your taint?" We all had a good laugh and I had my taint lanced. A patient very hesitant with what was actually up, so went in for an x-ray. Unmistakable shape of a Barbie doll right up his butt. So, emergency surgery and it's removed. He came to and saw his wife at his bedside. He panicked and when she went to the ladies, he asked the nurses not to tell her what's happened. She comes back in and one of the nurses brings back the crap-smeared Barbie doll in a small plastic bag. His wife glares at him. I once saw a high school-aged kid come in with a dinner candle stuck in his rectum. He reportedly was using it to reach an itch. Apparently, the itch was in his spleen because that thing was deep. His mom told me the story and how she had previously asked him to not itch himself with other things of hers. I didn't ask for any more details. I honestly think she believed that he was just really itchy. Well, folks, it's been a while since the narrator has done a medical video, and honestly, I was beginning to delude myself into thinking that there weren't actually that many stories about guys who got curious and tripped and fell onto things that then happened to go up their butts. But there we go. 4 out of 5 of our first stories all have that exact specific subject, and all 5 are kind of about troublesome objects and butts, so if I worded the criteria correctly, I could probably pass this off as a perfect run. Except the word perfect really has no place near any of this. I'm a corrections officer. I had an inmate complain about a pain in his Johnson. Took him to the facility hospital. He had screws jammed into his pee-pee hole. About 14, if I recall correctly. They took the screws out of him and put him on some psych meds. About a week later, he cut his own member off with a broken mirror and flushed it down the loo. That part of his anatomy was never recovered. Sent a male patient into the bathroom to collect a number 1 sample. Took him much longer than expected. He had misunderstood and given a splooge sample. Oh, I've got one. I had my nose straightened and septum shaved after I broke it like an idiot. I woke up after anesthesia feeling like the frickin' man. After about a minute of being awake, I tore out my IV, stood up, and started walking out of my room because I was going to walk home, about 3 miles, and finish that one mission in Heroes of Might and Magic 3. I walked past a nurse and she said, "You're bleeding." "Haha, no, I feel amazing," I responded. I kept walking until I got to the elevator, and I saw my reflection in the metal. My face is bandaged up, with black and blue bruising leaking out from under the white fabric. My eyes are bloodshot, and I generally look like crap. But hey, that doesn't matter, right? My immediate next memory is waking up sometime later, back in my bed in the hospital with the IV inserted into the other arm, and I'm strapped to the bed. Turns out I'd been on a morphine drip, and that's why I felt like Superman. My parents start yelling, and I'm like, "What you flimmin' walking but?" Turns out I gave myself a concussion while I collapsed while waiting for the elevator. On the bright side, that's how I found out painkillers are amazing and that they'd help me survive a year of intense manual labor when I ran away from home. On the downside, I was addicted to painkillers. I was 12 and I had an infection in the old man purse, and tried to hide it, hoping it would just go away. I was walking funny and it eventually turned kind of purple. My parents got very worried and spoke to me about why I was walking funny. Finally, I had to show my mum my crazy, swollen berries, and we went to the doctors the next day. While I was there, I explained the situation. They needed to do tests, so I was given morphine so they could ultrasound my nads. There was this super attractive nurse doing the ultrasound too. She got clear jelly all over my downstairs area. It still hurt, but man, if that wasn't one of the first rock-hard eggplants I'd ever got, I don't know what was. I was so weirded out by the whole situation. First, I get an infection down there. Then I'm given morphine. Then I get jelly slathered all over my splooge wallet. Then I see one of the prettiest girls in my life and she touches my disgusting, morbid sack. I tried desperately hard not to smirk because it still felt kind of good, also being ticklish, but every couple of seconds I'd giggle and smile, but then a quarter second later it would hurt and be painful. So this was all just kind of like a roller coaster, especially being so young. It went on like that for at least 5 minutes. I don't really remember what the problem was, but if I recall correctly, it had a bacterial infection, but that cleared right up and I was fine. I think the only lasting effect from that was that women with short hair are still very attractive to me. Doctors and nurses, if you're reading this, thank you, but holy crap, that was confusing. In short, had an infection and had a hands-on experience that I'll never forget. One time a lady came into the ER with itching and pain in her hoo-ha. She said she had used some garlic as a natural way to fight a yeast infection. And no, it wasn't from eating the garlic. Not hidden from us, but from her boyfriend. She came in with $9 grand in cash which she had wrapped in plastic and shoved up her hoo-ha. Her natural acids in there had disintegrated the plastic wrap, and she had to be anesthetized to get it all out. The 10-inch long cucumber that the male patient had tripped and fallen on, which was distending his abdomen on the other side of his body. The patient said nothing until the CT scan showed the mass. I had a lecturer who told me about a homeless guy who regularly presented to ED complaining stomach pain. He'd get an abdomen x-ray which showed a bunch of wire inside his abdo. He'd be added to the next day's emergency theatre list, get a hot meal and a bed for the night, before hoofing it the next morning and self-discharging before surgery. He'd purposefully pierced his belly with a wire coat hanger and fed the thing inside himself so he could go around to hospitals and score a free hotel room for the night. And by the way, this isn't a place with universal healthcare, so even though he was a regular and the hospital staff knew him by name, they couldn't refuse treatment and couldn't force him to have the coat hanger removed either. Good lord. The narrator came here for fun, silly stories about people with things up their butts, not sad stories of the desperate measures some people will go to get a good night's rest and a meal. This is heartbreaking. And before people go saying this is why you shouldn't have free healthcare, no. Just no. We have free healthcare so that down-on-their-luck folks who need medical attention can get it without being refused service or being put further into crippling debt. The occasional case of a guy like this abusing the system is just the price we have to pay for that. Oh god, I need to tell this story. My uncle is a retired surgeon. One day an elderly man gets to the ER with the handle of a paintbrush up his butt. We're talking decades ago in a countryside hospital where sticking things up your butt was a big taboo. Go figure in an old man's mind. So, word spreads among the staff, and doctors and nurses enter the poor man's room pretending to do preliminary checks and ask him why he's there. By chance, he also has a scratch on his wrist, and that was his answer to everyone. "Oh, you see, I have this scratch here, and I wanted to have it checked." Oh, it wasn't the patient, it was his awful relatives. They came into my office to ask me to see this old guy because he had, quote, accidentally cut himself and wanted some stitches. I told them I couldn't do any stitching with a lack of sterile equipment, but would gladly apply some steri strips if the wound allowed it, as long as they brought the man to the office. That request was denied. They kept insisting that I see him at their home. Fine. I loaded up my bag to go and check on the old fellow. I found him in his bed, conscious but refusing to talk, with various superficial knife wounds on his stomach and a gigantic hematoma in the process of swelling up on his forehead. I flipped out and got the relatives to finally talk. They said the man had fought with his sister and decided to repeatedly slam a hammer into his forehead and then had tried to disembowel himself with a kitchen knife. They didn't call an ambulance because they were, and I quote, ashamed and didn't want to deal with assisting the man in a faraway hospital. I gave them 15 minutes to get their crap together and either call an ambulance or get the man to the hospital themselves. Never found out what became of him. When I was in the hospital, there was a homeless guy there that was beyond drunk. This guy was next-level crap. He had 2 doctors, 3 nurses, a cop, and an orderly trying to keep him restrained. He thought he was forming coherent sentences, but the words, "I'm not fricking drunk," came out several times. Along with, "I don't even drink alcohol, it was rainwater." They kept telling him that they'd sedate him if he wouldn't stop his wild behavior, and I'm guessing they couldn't because of his blood alcohol level. Every 20 minutes he'd get riled up again and the same thing would start over. Eventually, he admitted to alcoholism and the cop left and the 2 doctors looked after the man. The guy even ripped out his IV. Well, I'm a radiographer, and sometimes you see those objects stuck deep inside patients. I've seen a spray can, a screwdriver, a potato, or the proper adult toy gone way too far. But the more surprising one was a woman that used a Coke 33 centiliter glass as a plaything. She didn't have enough, so she used another. I guess she felt nothing due to excitement because she pushed the first bottle into the uterus, breaking the cervix by pushing with the second bottle. Ugh. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Sister's friend is a nurse and told the story of a man who came into the ED clutching his abdomen and complaining of severe abdominal pain. He was acting suspicious and kept changing his story, symptoms, site of the pain. My sister's friend and a few other nurses suspected something wasn't right, and after maybe an hour or so, he confessed the true cause of his pain. He had inserted a deflated full-size basketball, a very cheap one, into his butt and pumped it up. Amazingly, he somehow managed to pump the ball up to the point where it popped inside his butt. The popping is what caused his pain, but the kicker was he hadn't come to the ED to treat the pain. The basketball was still inside his butt, and after the pop, a combination of pain, presumable swelling, and it still being semi-inflated meant that he was unable to retrieve it himself. She didn't go into detail as to how the basketball was retrieved, but I can't imagine that it was very pleasant. In short, Guy put a basketball up his butt and inflated it until it popped, and he was unable to retrieve it himself. Pregnancy. A patient arrived into the ER triage. She's in her early 30s and complaining of lower abdominal pain and nausea. The British triage nurse, who tells the story best, says the poor woman was bent over double in her chair. From all accounts, she was a relatively skinny individual. In order to make sure there was no emerging emergency, our triage nurse has a peek at the patients downstairs. She was greeted by a crowning baby. The nurse bolts up and runs into the ER and grabs my attending. "Sir, she's up the duff." Confused, and there was a brief, who's on first exchange before my attending and I just ran in, just in time to catch a healthy 8-pound baby before it hit the floor. There were several other incidents similar to this, but none so pronounced. The mother denied being pregnant right up until the moment her baby girl was on her chest. In short, duff denied, nurse pried, mum lied, baby cried. I've read just enough stories like this in my time here to be able to say that no matter what the percentage of pregnant women is that somehow deceive themselves into thinking otherwise, it's way bigger than you'd like to hope. Absolutely insane. I watched this one guy in the ER. The guy walks to the back with a couple of towels on his shoulder. He looks like blood is starting to seep through the towels. The nurse asks, "What happened?" She starts to take the towel off and her face turns from a smile to very serious. Calls over the doctor and others. The guy said, "I was cutting some branches overhead with a chainsaw. It got caught on one of the branches and came back on my shoulder. Now there's basically a crowd around the man and they're getting ready to take him back for surgery. He'd basically cut into his own chest with a chainsaw. Not life-threateningly bad at that point since he walked in. I was in awe, to be honest. I always wondered how he shut that damn thing off before straight up murdering himself." My best friend's mother is a nurse. One night, as a joke, my friend decides to show her One Man, One Jar, which is a hilarious thing to watch with your mum, right? Anyway, this woman is just deadpan the entire video and follows it up with, "Oh, is that it? Okay." Dumbfounded, we ask what she could have seen that could possibly be grosser than that, right? She proceeds to tell us in detail about a man who stuffed a hamster into a johnny, then shoved the rat bag up his butt. The hamster then, out of suffocation, chewed through the protection, clawed its way deep inside him, where it drowned in a mixture of blood and number 2 after shredding his colon in a frenzy. Like the messed up, real-life version of that one South Park joke. She was part of the team that had to retrieve said rodent. His mum always seemed like a demure housewife, but damn. That lady has seen some crap. My sister is in organ donation. The biggest obstacle is people thinking, doctors will let me die and steal my organs. First of all, if you die, your organs are useless. They can take corneas, long bones, ligaments, and sometimes skin from dead bodies, but those aren't rare or in demand. Everything they do to save your organs would also save your life. You need to be brain dead but have a steady heartbeat on a machine that breathes for you to donate organs. Usually, the doctors need to work for hours to save an organ donor, which is an effort they don't take on a non-donor. She's been called to cases where the doctors thought the patient was dead meat. She didn't get called unless they're brain dead. But the doctors keep working because it's an organ donor. They'd have called a non-donor on arrival and sent them to the morgue. But they keep working and the person's revived or recovered, and sometimes fully recovers. If you want everything done on you to give you a chance, sign your donor card. I signed mine after she told me about that. She signed hers. If you're a non-donor, the doctors will just give up on you if they think you're a lost cause. I had a patient who, instead of treating her choice to have an artificial donor insemination as an empowerment move, had everyone else convinced that her child had a deadbeat dad who took off when he was born. She felt that this made her look empowered because she stood up as a single mom. The now school-aged kid knew about this but was horrible at lying. When I asked him about what life was like at home, he said something along the lines of, good, just me and mom. She's a good mom. Pretend dad ran away. There's no real dad though. When my sister started out working as a doctor, she got one of these, I guess, pretty regular adolescent boys with their sister's toy in the butt. She sent me a picture of the x-ray too. He said he fell on it, of course. I'm a neurologist in Spain. We were brought a patient with an acute stroke in the morning. Asking him about how it happened, he said he'd gone out for an early morning jog when he fell down, unable to move the left part of his body. An hour later, a nurse asked him the same question, and he gave another different fake answer. Turns out he'd woken up early, left his house, and he was doing the deed with a working girl when he suffered the stroke. It was this woman who'd called the ambulance. The tough part was meeting his family. Oh, you know. 70-year-old man, 12-inch hand-carved wooden marital aid normally meant for women, doesn't know how it got up there. You know the rest of the story. Yes, tripped and fell. We know the story like the back of our hands just by the end of this one video. But the real question here is whether this guy carved said implement himself. And how lifelike was it? And was it varnished? I want to know exactly how much work went into this woody before it was unfortunately mistakenly shoved a foot into the man from a very precise angle. Had this patient come in once, you could clearly see she was north of 60, wrinkles with a cute, no-teeth smile. We asked her age. She gave her crooked, cute smile and says, "Son, I'm 40 years, but my grandchildren say I look quite young." I did an internship with a doctor, a dermatologist, and she told me that one day a homeless guy came to the hospital with a bandage on his foot, saying it was painful. The nurses were afraid to take care of him because of the horrible smell and, of course, discovered what was under the bandage. The dermatologist was called and she said she did it herself. When she opened it, the foot of the guy just fell off. He got an infection and larvae started to eat his foot. Ugh. Does a semi-rotten sandwich found lodged within the folds of a heartbreakingly obese patient's panniculus during an emergency procedure count? Oh, I have tons of weird stories. When I was a fourth-year medical student doing a rotation at the Veterans Administration Hospital, the patient came into the emergency room complaining of stomach pain. We did an X-ray which showed 2 toothbrushes in his stomach. He explained to us that he had the sensation that there was something on the back of his throat and used his toothbrush to try and get rid of it, and accidentally swallowed the toothbrush. The same thing happened with the second one. We consulted gastroenterology and the toothbrushes were removed via endoscopy. He was admitted to the hospital for observation overnight. The next morning he complained of the stomach pain again. A follow-up X-ray revealed that he had swallowed his entire convenience kit at the hospital, including the small toothbrush, small tube of toothpaste, and even his plastic razor. Needless to say, we called psychiatry for consultation. It turns out this was not the first episode for this guy. He just liked to swallow things. In the summer, my brother and I used to spend our time in the backyard looking for caterpillars and frogs. Given I was 4 years old and I didn't know what I was doing, I thought it would be funny to put a caterpillar down my 2-year-old brother's swim trunks. He didn't feel the caterpillar go down there, so I didn't get the reaction that I wanted from him, so I just forgot about the whole thing and moved on. Later that day, when my mum was changing his diaper, she screamed and saw all of these spikes in his butt that he must have got from the caterpillar when he sat down. Turns out he had an allergic reaction to it, and we had to go to the doctor to get all of those spikes out of his butt. Here's my circus of specimens. A lady presented multiple times requiring admission for systemic infection found to be a weird amoebiasis. ID docs were very confused. This was in the middle of a US suburban area. She was drinking her fish tank water to get sick. A morbidly obese lady came into the ED, altered and obtunded, kept responding to Narcan and then getting obtunded again. 3 fentanyl patches eventually found hidden on the underside of her pendulous chest. A working girl kitted out with what seemed like an assassin's kit, including a large wire garrote, 4 knives, and various poisons in her handbag. And of course, the guy who came in from jail in excited delirium with an uncomfortably large quantity of illegal substances hidden up his butt. Somewhere deep in Alabama, an elderly lady came in and said she was having stomach pain or some kind of pain. When he was examining her, he noticed she had pain near her uterus and female areas. So she got undressed for another exam and she casually said to him, "Now, I do got leaves growing out of my Virginia." He looked and saw that, by God, she did. She'd put a potato down there to hold up her prolapsed uterus. I poked myself with a sharp lead pencil and jabbed my hand and made little dots in the shape of a male member, then connected them with a line. 10 years later, the lines are gone and the dots are still there. Eggplant hand is my nickname, always an eggplant in my hand. Not a doctor, but my friend's sister is. 2 people came into the A&E one night, let's call them A and B. A had cuts around their lower back, upper thighs, and in and around their butt. B had cuts and a shard of glass in their face. Upon admission, they didn't say what the cause of these wounds was. It wasn't until they found traces of number 2 in the second patient's wounds that they said what happened. As it turned out, A had been sitting on a glass table taking a number 2, while B sat directly beneath to watch while they took said movement. The glass table gave way and broke during this spectacle. You might say it was a bloody crappy experience. People of the internet, when were you witness to life's craziest phenomenons? Once, my sister lost the lunch check she was supposed to turn into the office at school. Later that day, she found another girl's lunch check on the ground and decided to do the good deed and turn it into the office for her. When my sister got to the office, though, the girl whose check she'd found was there, also turning in my sister's check that she had found on the ground earlier that day. Honestly, the thing that I thought I would never see was a mother's tearful rendition of "You Are My Sunshine," This was at the funeral of her young adult son, who had decided he didn't want to be alive anymore in his room a few weeks after Christmas. This was made even more sad by the fact that she had previously lost a child to sudden infant death syndrome. When I was really young, I'd ask my dad if I was his real son because I was Asian and he was white. He'd always tell me that he was my dad and I was his son. I wouldn't bring it up too often, but for some reason, the thought just itched at the back of my mind. Fast forward to my first year at college. I meet my biological mother and she tells me that my dad isn't my biological father and that I was actually the son of one of my dad's friends from the Navy. My dad didn't find out until I was about 5, and afterward he decided to raise me in spite of my mother cheating on him. He's always been my dad. There was so much that had happened to lead up to his decision to continue raising me alone. I have an enormous respect for him. Now that I'm an adult, I can see that not many people would have taken the road he took. He decided that he had a moral obligation to keep raising me, and he wrestled with the legal system back when there weren't many rights for single dads. On the flip side, I also love my mother because in the end she realized that she wasn't capable of raising me and relinquished full custody to my dad. You know what's crazy is that my story isn't even unique. So many people have had crazy family drama. It really puts it in perspective. My husband is a high school football coach and the first game of the season is tomorrow. He's already been offered money, bedroom favors, and free yard work from parents as long as he starts their kid. He isn't even the head coach. Our oldest son is on the team, and my husband likes to point out that our son doesn't always start either. I really hate parents. It's high school. It's time to cut the cord. If your kid isn't good, they likely won't be on the field much. What the actual frick? Is this Texas? Because I know that football is more important than food there, but my god, some of these folks are taking it way too seriously even for that state. So many questions. What social class is the school? How bad are their kids? What is on the line for them to offer these things? I work in retail sales, selling pretty common technology. You meet all sorts of people. People who are weird, people who are cool, people who are absolute jerks. I've made friends with my customers a few times, although I usually keep everything on my work phone. No Facebook messages or hangouts. I've grown up and currently work in Texas. A wonderful place. I met a nice older lady at work who I'll call Mrs. Texas. She was always decked out. Texas purse, Texas boots, Texas nails, the whole deal. She bought her tech somewhere else and, like most people her age, had a billion questions. She got sold something that's pretty crappy and got tired of the people who ripped her off. Mrs. Texas came to my store and I started helping her out. I'd say probably once a month for about a year, she'd come in and I'd need to fix what she had. Nothing too major, just reorganization things and telling her everything's good to go. We'd chat a little bit. One time, her tech suddenly reset in my hands. I felt guilty, although I knew I did nothing wrong. She lost pictures of her dog that had just passed away. Most people would cuss me apart and I'd have to kick them out for things like this. She was upset, but not at me. Great frickin' lady. She started having a few surgeries on her eyes. They didn't heal at all. It really stressed her out and slowed her down. The last time I saw her in the store, she could barely see. 2 days ago, I got a phone call from Mrs. Texas. She said it was important and asked me to call her back. Hey, usually, frick customers and their tech questions once I'm off my shift, right? But I called Mrs. Texas. She explained that she had recently fallen and broken her arm. After sitting in the hospital for some time, her liver and kidneys gave out. She lost a ton of weight and knew her time was coming. The conversation was weird, but she was so calm. She told me she was going to die soon and wanted to thank me for being such a nice guy. Mrs. Texas called me on her fricking deathbed to thank me for simply doing my job. I bought her some flowers and went to her house today, talked for a while and said goodbye. She was as happy as someone who knew their time was coming could be. Mrs. Texas will probably pass soon. I've said my goodbyes and thanked her for blessing my life. Sorry for being such a downer, I just really wanted to post this and I didn't know where else to go. I'm a preschool teacher. One of my students sheepishly asked me if it was okay to ask me a question. I, of course, assured her she can always ask me anything on her mind. She then says, "Only mamas can say mother fricker, right?" After sucking my entire face in to prevent myself from laughing, I confirm, yes, only mamas. Not really a story, more of a question. I didn't know where else to go. I worked with the guy who has severe autism. Whenever I come in, I always cheerfully say, "Hi, Johnny." Obviously, because of his condition, he never responds. In fact, he doesn't look at me, change his facial expression, or do anything to indicate he heard me. But sometimes I'll ask him how he is and he'll look at me in the eye and quietly say, "Good." Other times, he will come up to me and strike up a conversation with me at his own volition. Or if I ask him questions, he'll answer. A lot of times, I'll joke around with him and I can make him laugh. But this is my question. Is there a chance that I'm bothering him by saying hi to him? Might he just want to be left alone? Or does he maybe appreciate people saying hi to him even though he can't respond? I've never worked closely with anyone who has autism, so I don't know what their preferences are with certain situations such as this one. My brother is autistic, and all cases are very different, but it seems like a common thing is that they need predictability. I'd say just to make sure you make a routine with the way you interact with him and he'll feel much more comfortable. My wife is a therapist who works with neurodivergent children, and my brother absolutely loves her. She always greets him the same, and I always notice him open up when she's talking to him. Thanks for being kind. Yeah, this is a complete guess, but if he starts conversations with you of his own volition, you make him laugh and he doesn't react negatively when you say hi, he doesn't mind a bit. You might even be his good buddy. I frequently walk my dog at a ravine near my house in Toronto. On more than one occasion, a Chinese tour bus has pulled up and flooded the ravine with old Asian women who proceed to take pictures of me and my dog. Sometimes when I'm feeling down, I just think that somewhere I'm in some old Asian woman's slideshow. I smuggled 2 illegal workers out of my job and drove them to the airport and bought them plane tickets so they could get back home. The job was at a summer camp and they lived in the staff house on the property and didn't have cars in the US, so they were just stuck there all day every day, being taken advantage of and overworked, and one day they broke down. And I was like, alright, let's do this. I got fired the next day. I mean, I'm sure that they had to write a fake bullcrap reason on why they were firing you, but part of my brain likes to think that your old workplace gave you a pink slip saying, "They smuggled out our illegal labor slaves, meaning that now we have to pay for workers or find more." Regardless of my silly musings, well done. You did a great thing for those people. So, my sophomore year of college, my roommates and I had the best thing happen ever. I lived in a house with 7 of my good buds. It was a big state college, fun college town. We had a really crazy time, but this was the cherry on top. In the last 2 weeks of our lease, a guy just knocks on our door saying that they're scouting locations for a TV pilot to film a scene. 2 days later, he informs us that they want to use our house. The show's working title is Migilantes, featuring a gang of little people that defend other little people from persecution. Despite the questionable political correctness of the show's title, we accept. They give us $300, which immediately went to alcohol, and the only thing they needed from us was to throw a party. Easy. We invite all of our friends over, and all that were convinced it wasn't bullcrap showed up. The premise of the scene, and keep in mind that this is a, quote, reality show, was that the attendees of this college party, who were all actors, were harassing a little person and going to throw him around the house, when all of a sudden, here come the Migilantes. They burst through the front door as we're all chanting, "Toss! Toss! Toss!" and start to beat the crap out of the evil partygoers. This involves them pinning them down and pulling their pants down and then sitting on them. The whole scene is absolute chaos as my friends and I are cheering on the debauchery for the several takes that they do. Once it's all over, my buddies and I are sharing drinks with the gang of little people, and one of them even went out with us the next night. I've told this story countless times, and thankfully I still have a few photos and videos to validate that it actually happened, otherwise there's no way anyone would believe me. Last I heard, the show wasn't picked up because the network didn't think that the Migilantes were doing a good job of defending against persecution by just beating people up. I haven't seen the footage, but I would pay a pretty penny to get a hold of it. Anyway, been wanting to share my story for a while now. Just not sure where it fit. My grandmother was murdered by her caregiver on the 17th of June 2016. The caregiver hit her in the head with a hammer, dismembered her, put her body parts in trash bags, drove them about 2 hours across the state line, and dumped them in the middle of the night. She burned all of the bedding, her purse, and tried to set some of the parts on fire. On the 21st of the same month, the detectives interrogated the caregiver with evidence they'd collected. She gave a partial confession and told them where the body parts were. My mum is really struggling. I'm going on vacation for 2 weeks, leaving Sunday, which has been planned for a while, and we're leaving the country. I feel guilty because my mum is struggling and I'm excited about vacation. I feel guilty that I'm not struggling with everything the same way my mum is. I could write for an hour and still not give you all the details of the crazy stuff that happened with my grandmother's murder, or process all of my feelings. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I grew up in a really small town. Everyone knew everyone. I wasn't very well liked by a lot of the kids in my school, and as a result, I was bullied. I got my first boyfriend when I was 16. I'd wanted so desperately to be liked because I felt so alone since my grandfather, who raised me, had died a month before. So I did any and everything he wanted. I was pregnant within a month. I was so embarrassed I dropped out of school. My boyfriend then cheated on me. My grandmother kicked me out. I lost the baby. My boyfriend's sister started a rumor that I'd never actually been pregnant and had lied about the entire thing, and being that I hadn't been very far along before I lost the kid, pretty much everyone in town believed her. I became the laughingstock of my hometown, so I left. I briefly lived with my mother a state over when I was 17. The entire reason I'd been raised by my grandparents was because my mother was not capable of looking after a child, so as you can imagine, when I moved over there at 17, things did not go well between her and I. I lived with her for maybe 2 weeks, and then I met Trey, and he really saved me from the hell that was my life. When we got together, he did everything in his power to get me away from my mother. He and his parents came up with an arrangement. I could live with them and continue to be in a relationship with Trey, but we had to sleep in separate rooms. Trey's parents are very religious, so this is how they justified allowing their son's girlfriend to live with them. All they asked for in exchange was for me to help out around the house. So I did. I got a job and started paying rent. I got my GED and my CNA. I worked as a CNA at a long-term care facility, and also as a shift manager at a local convenience store. Trey and I got engaged. We've been married for 2 years now. We have our own place, a ferret, and a new puppy. I no longer work as a CNA or a manager. Currently, I'm a waitress and I love it. Trey is finishing his last year in college as an education major and is in a band that plays paying gigs and has a sizable fan base. I'm pursuing my writing and considering going to college. We can pay our bills and do so on time. I have a home now, and a husband and a family. And really, there's no moral to the story, it's just amazing to see how far I've come in 4 years. And please consider what I'm about to say. No matter how dark your days may become, don't ever give up. Even when you feel like you're at your wit's end and you don't have the strength to move forward, make every effort to continue on. I know what it's like to feel like you have no will to move forward. I know what it's like to feel like death would be a sweet release from what you're living in, but it can get better and it will. I can promise you that. When I was 16, I never imagined that at the age of 20, my life would be completely turned around. I never thought I'd find love. I never thought I'd see a day where I didn't want to give up. I never imagined I'd even live to see 20, but I did. And my life, though not without imperfections, is one I'd never dreamed I'd have. Thank you for sharing. I know due to the nature of the question that this would be a pretty mixed bunch of replies, but stories like this really do inspire and encourage me that there's always a way out of even the darkest of life's pits. I hope you and your partner and ferret are well. One time I ate 26 chocolate chip cookies because I was mad at my little sister and didn't want her to have any. I then proceeded to throw them up all over the place. I was pretty much a toddler at the time. My parents had brought a brand new inflatable boat for a few $100s. They'd fully inflated the boat and we were testing it out in the backyard. While they were sitting in it, I went to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, went back to the backyard and stabbed the boat right in front of them. What followed was a tumultuous couple of hours. I just came back home after 6 weeks to discover that at some point during that time, the breakers tripped and the house was without electricity for a long time. You can imagine what happened to the freezer, but you probably can't imagine the smell. I am not looking forward to cleaning that up tomorrow. Okay, update, I'm about 3/4 done with the crap. It's not nearly as bad as I feared, but it was still pretty nasty. All you people who keep saying that the smell will never come out and I should just replace the freezer, you all need more bleach in your lives. One time I went to Maine and lobsters were only about $3, so I ate 5 of them and then chucked them up all over the lawn. You know, this whole group of stories is just such a frickin' roller coaster. Jesus Christ! A year and a half ago, I was an active alcoholic who spent his day working with kids and his nights drinking to black out or pass out. I hated my job and myself. My New Year's resolution in 2015 was to start a business a month for a year and hope that one of them stuck. Mostly, I just wanted to make myself face that fear of failure head on. It's now 20 months later. I'm sober, I've lost weight, I've reconnected with my family, and I managed to try 5 businesses before the 6th one stuck. I moved home and run a jelly company while I start my MBA. Seriously, I'm writing this right now as the new batch boils away and my 3rd employee runs the dishes. The point is, fear sucks. Face it hard and you'll be much happier. My best friend was diagnosed with esophageal cancer around April of 2014. He called me the minute he was diagnosed. I live in the Midwest and he had moved to the West Coast, and he told me the outlook was really bad. He had noticed something wrong the prior Thanksgiving, difficulty swallowing, the feeling of something in his throat that never went down with water or more food. When he was diagnosed, he began treatments almost immediately. Things got worse before they got better. His wife would give me updates as much as she could. She started working as much as she could because he got to where he had good days and bad days. One of our chats had him excited about the fact that he could concentrate his efforts on his artistic abilities while taking time off work. I coaxed him into creating a tattoo design for me that would represent my daughter in an abstract form. He did so after a month or 2 and sent me a picture of the design, and I loved it. He was cleared to fly home to where I live in August of that year after some intense chemo. He was doing really well and the doctors had great hopes. We had a good time, he got to meet my daughter for the 2nd time, and it was just like the old days. He died on December 27th of that year. The virus had spread to his abdomen and he couldn't handle it. His wife called me a week before saying that she wasn't sure he'd last much longer. Work was slow at the time, and having a young daughter, along with a wife who was staying home full-time, made it borderline impossible to leave, let alone afford a $1,000 plane ticket. The night he passed, her friends were scraping airline miles together to get me out there. I still miss him like crazy. I still have the voicemail he left me that fall on my phone. I still feel it randomly at the end of my new VMs, and it's nice to hear. Even though I know that he knew, it still stings that I didn't get one more conversation with him. I'm getting into shape to have the tattoo done this year. After a lengthy divorce and separation, along with the bills and everything that comes with that, I'm finally in a place to get it done how I want. Hopefully, come November, I'll have the greatest tattoo I'll ever get. That's the story I needed to tell. Thank you for listening. I had this janitor in middle school. When I think about it now, he was severely autistic. I thought he was a teen who worked for the school. Turns out he was almost 40 at the time. All the faculty and students treated him as a kid and always praised how he was the best at his job. Cleaning spills and taking kids to the loo, helping get papers around. He once saw me steal chalk out of the teacher's lounge. And I know, I'm talking about when I was 10. I remember his face. He was conflicted. He was upset, but he never told any of the teachers. The next 3 days, he comes up to me, and I got super scared thinking that he's going to rat me out. He gives me 3 full pieces of chalk, unlike the broken scraps I was nicking from the lounge, and he walks away without saying anything. I made a point to say hi every day. He never really replied, and I remember he had difficulty with eye contact, but he'd always have chalk. While working my campus job, I once had a girl try to go number 2 out of the window of a moving van, and it was still during training. My trainer just said, "Ah, frick, not this again." When I was in 3rd grade, I was chilling in the bathroom. A kid walks in and pulls out a pack of gum. I said, "Can I have a piece?" And he said, "Sure." Another kid named Preston walks from behind and asked the same thing to the gum kid. The gum kid said that was his last piece. Preston turns to me and offered me $1 for my piece. I weighed out my options and decided to give the gum to Preston. The next day I see Preston and I say, "Hey, did you bring my $1?" He says, "No." The next day I come up to him and ask him the same question. He says, "I'll bring it next week." I'm starting to get annoyed, getting angry at myself for giving him the gum. The next week comes, I ask him again, and he says, "In 4th grade." Now he thinks it's a frickin' game. Little does he know I'm very persistent. Every couple of days I'd remind him and he'd say the same thing. "In 4th grade." The first day of 4th grade, I come and find him. I ask him again, "Where's my $1?" He bumps it up another year, saying, "5th grade." Again, I bug him every couple of days. Now, this went on for a couple of years. In 6th grade, he said he'd give it to me in junior high. In junior high, he said he'd give it to me in high school. And in high school, he said on graduation. Now, I'm holding him to this. We'll most likely never see each other again after that, so it's then or never. 3 years later, it's graduation day, 9 days since I gave him the gum. I walked, got my diploma, everything was going great, but in the back of my mind, I know the actual goal for the day is getting my fricking $1. I walk through crowds of people, still can't find him. Just as I'm about to give up, I look over and Preston is standing there, holding the $1. My eyes light up. I finally got my $1. I grab it, hold it in the air, and yell. I give him a big hug and he told me, "Dylan, that gum was freaking delicious." And we parted ways. I jumped off a moving train once. Was hanging out with a friend and thought it'd be fun to climb on a train. Well, the train started moving and I'm still sitting on the side. I knew I'd have to get off, but I'm scared to jump. But the speed keeps building up. After maybe 30 seconds, and it felt like an hour, I told myself I have to get off or it'll just keep building speed. So I build up my courage, spot a grassy patch ahead, and totally parkour dive off. Like parallel with the ground, movie-style dive. I land on my side, roll a crap ton of times, and stand up. I immediately check myself for injuries, find none, and search for my phone. It's lost, and also I think I heard it shatter. My friend runs up, terrified. I went like a mile down the tracks. Well, it doesn't end there. We're walking back, I'm cut up and bloody when a cop car shows up. The officer gets out, looks at me and says, "Son, did you jump off a train?" Long story short, someone saw me and reported me. He thought I was a runaway kid at first, found out that I wasn't, told me I could be thrown in jail on multiple charges, but lets me off. I had to ride in an ambulance though to make sure I was fine, which I was. And to conclude, that's when I officially decided to become a paramedic. What epic fails have you seen from people starting their own business? At a place I used to work, we supplied printing companies with their ink. Being that digital printing is well and truly established at this point, there wasn't a whole lot of business for this kind of ink anymore, so there was a lot of competition between suppliers. One of the technicians somehow weaseled his way to the top despite having no business experience. When he was told very simply just to make more money rather than go out and find new customers, his bright idea was to make our company's ink weaker with the intention that our customers would just have to buy more product to complete their jobs. Surprise! The customers didn't like that and went to the competitors. Business was closed within a year. The CEOs of the parent company in Japan weren't fully aware of everything this guy was doing to run the business into the ground. There was a lot more stupid crap he'd pull. I could probably fill a book with stories from that place. It was not a sound business plan that you could compare to other products and companies, because we were already getting some complaints that some of our colors were weak. This is what gave the guy the idea to make them weaker. He was told by several people it was a stupid idea and that it wouldn't have the desired effect, and that it would just drive our clients away. He was certain, though, that they'd all just accept the crappier product and pay more for it. The Banana Pudding Store. One day, my ex-boyfriend and I were taking a stroll downtown in the city that we were living in at the time. We passed a store that was called the Banana Pudding Store, or some such, I don't really remember exactly. Well, I say, let's go in. I'm sure that they sell more than just banana pudding. You know, like how Home Depot sells more than just hardware. Those guys sell Gatorade and candy bars. We went in and there were vats of banana pudding in the display cases, and I thought, well, surely they must sell other flavors. So I asked if I could have a chocolate pudding, and the guy politely informed me that they didn't have chocolate pudding. So I asked if maybe they had butterscotch or something else. No ma'am, just banana pudding here. I mean, it wasn't false advertising, but surely he couldn't be selling just one single flavor in that whole shop, could he? As expected, the next time we strolled down that street a month or two later, his store was shuttered. I feel bad for him. I'm sure that the guy made great banana pudding that all his friends and family would compliment him on and tell him that he should probably open a banana pudding shop because it was so good, right? But I don't think they literally meant that. Yeah, this sounds like an idea for a business you have when you're 12 and realize of your own accord that it might not be that great of an idea or just never get around to it. Why did nobody stop him? I kind of feel bad for the guy. Maybe try selling your niche product online first there, pal? Oh god, my friend that tried to grow green herb in the woods. It ended up working like a charm. He had so much green herb he could barely pick it all. Filled multiple garbage bags with it. Loaded the bags into his car. Then, well, he didn't research properly and just let it sit. He tried to smoke some of it after it got damp, but as you can guess, it just wasn't burning. A few days later, it was covered in hot mold, and the car smelled like a planet-sized skunk had exploded inside it. My schoolmate at high school wanted to be a club manager. He organized a concert where he invited a kind of famous foreign band to the local club. He paid so much money for them just to arrive and their expenses at the bar. In the end, about 20 people showed up, half of them were his friends. Fortunately, he had a rich dad, so his dad paid for that and life went on. The guy started selling art the next day. No need to say he failed miserably again. In about 2005, my friend's dad tried to start an arcade. In a small town, quite a long walk away from a school using beat-up second-hand machines. To get there from school, you'd have to walk by an established, larger arcade that also sold food. For some context, I live in Las Vegas. When I was in my 20s, I was hired by a man who wanted to build MySpace for exotic dancers. His goal was for the men on the site to pay him to follow their favorite exotic dancers and know what clubs they were dancing at and when. He shut the project down after months of paying me when he found out that no exotic dancers would sign up for it. One of the younger dudes in my karate class was going to start a handyman business. 24 hours, anything needing to be done, anywhere in our district. Sounds good. You gonna get a loan and buy a used truck and get some tools? And you never have talk time on your phone, so you'll get a landline? This is 2006, so that wasn't super outlandish. No, I'll go on my bicycle and I'll just use the tools they have. And they can email me when they need service. Right, because when I have water spraying out of my geyser through the ceiling at 3 a.m., I'm going to email a guy on a bicycle to come and fix it using all the tools and ladder that I don't own. There was a guy in my town that opened a new business that was the equivalent of a brick-and-mortar version of Craigslist or newspaper classified ads. It was a unit in a strip mall with bulletin boards. You paid to put an ad up and other people came to look at the ads with a small picture. This was after Craigslist existed, by the way, not some pre-internet thing. There was no actual merchandise in the store, just crappy pictures of stuff with the contact info. It wasn't even a high-foot traffic location. You had to maneuver through a busy intersection, park, and go inside to look at a bulletin board. It went under, and he tried to blame the landlord because he couldn't get a sign permit for the end of the building, even though he had 2 other signs. When I was in high school, one of my friends wanted to start a little coffee/hot chocolate stand with a cuddle corner and free hugs for anyone who wants them. She offered jobs to our other friends. The idea was that this little business would be operated and staffed by high schoolers. She failed to see the issue with having 16-year-old girls required to give free hugs to customers or having to staff the cuddle corner. Oh. Hey, you remember that guy who went on Shark Tank to pitch a Bluetooth earpiece that you got surgically implanted in your ear canal that you charged by sticking a needle in your ear while you slept? Brilliant! Somebody thought that it would be a good idea to open a dance club in my northern Canadian city with a dress code. 90% of the population were tradespeople and miners who only own Carhartts and high-vis. Needless to say, it shut down within 6 months. I used to work with small startup businesses, not fancy tech startups. Lots of construction and restaurants. My favorite 2 are the following. The first one was a restaurant/hair salon/childcare center, but non-profit. And there were a lot of people who wanted to do non-profit. It was mostly very community-driven, wanting to give back and help employ people. She had a place picked out and was about to rent and had come to us to ask for money. She named the building, which was tiny and with no kitchen. She was lovely and we encouraged her to open the salon, but maybe without the salon workers cooking for folks in between clients, and without clients caring for kids. Then there was the escort bus. An older gentleman who was certain that this was a good idea. He wanted money to buy a bus, and then he was going to drive it around to find women who wanted to hang out with CEOs and executives. Then during the lunch hour, he was very insistent about the lunch hour part. He'd take it to the downtown business core and park it in front of the large business HQs, and the gentleman who worked there would pay to come party on the bus. But you see, they'd just be paying a fee to hang out on the bus, so it's not like the girls were being paid for doing the deed, so it's totally legal, right? He'd already bought the bus, and it was an old school bus. We didn't fund his endeavor. I'm trying to picture the guy who had this business idea, and all I'm seeing is Danny DeVito's character from Always Sunny in Philadelphia. This is a grade A Frank Reynolds idea, right down to the likely broken down and unsanitary school bus. I love it. An old, local pub legend, friend of mine, won $400K in British pounds, which is about $500,000 on the lottery. So he decided to buy 2 tanning salons opposite each other, thinking he had an instant monopoly. But the problem came when he started getting them to compete with one another. The managers at each salon began a pricing war, and he was broke in 6 months. The top for me has got to be a client of a design firm that I used to work at. He was a trucker, his wife was a trucker, he wanted to make a sanitary pad that wouldn't need to be changed. Imagine a pad with a little line running down to a micro vacuum strapped to your leg, exhausting into another leg bag. Basically, a pad that sucks the juices into a bag you can chuck in the trash later. Now, I know this sounds a bit like the PureWick, but the challenge this one would have to solve was passing chunky menstrual blood. Ladies, you know what's up, through a tiny tube. If you're wondering how they solved it, they didn't. Also, here's another good one. One client wanted a vape that just blew green herb smoke into the air for the purpose of hotboxing his car. He had money, so hey. One of the engineers designed a little turbine, like a small turbocharger the size of a cherry. Damn if it didn't work way too well. But the high-pitched, screeching noise that turbine made, sheesh. A lady opened a southern soul food buffet in my city. It was incredible. Amazing food. On some days. It was a buffet with a rotating menu depending on the day of the week, and those days were not equal to each other. So what happened was people would go on an off day, be unimpressed, not come back, or come on one of the better days, love it, and come back on an off day, then never come back. I was so disappointed. I'd donate towards reopening that restaurant, but with only the optimal menu every day. That woman has serious culinary talent. We have a small-time theme park in my state called Evermore, and they thought it would be a good idea to try and sue Taylor Swift over her album of the same name. They probably thought it would be a great publicity stunt where they'd get into national papers, and Swift would just give them a couple of grand to go away. In my college town, there was a cereal restaurant. Why make a bowl of cereal at home when you can pay $5 for someone else to do it? Not surprisingly, it closed down soon after opening. There was a bar that opened in my city and their entrance was hidden. They did a news story and they refused to tell the paper where it was actually located. To everyone's complete surprise, they only stayed open for a couple of weeks. The last hidden bar I went to had someone standing outside in the hidden entrance, and if you looked confused enough, they'd walk up to you and go, "You looking for the hidden bar?" and open the door for you. The venue at least had signs and they're listed on the webpage. In my country, there was a guy who used to sell wood. Get your minds out of the gutters. The problem is, he didn't have any of it. Get your minds out. So he'd ask for payment and then not give the product afterwards, hoping that procrastination and time would make the problem go away. He did 4 years in jail. I mean, wood jokes aside, that's just stealing. Yeah, well, he thought he was very smart. In addition, he'd make web lectures on marketing and how to be a successful businessman. He soon became a meme in the whole country. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My father-in-law drove 18 hours down to Florida to catch shrimp, filled his tiny car with tons of the shrimp, and drove back. It took days to seal the shrimp that hadn't gone bad, only to sell a few bags to some friends. The car smelled like seafood for years. In 2011, we had the Norwegian butter crisis in Norway. The shortage caused soaring prices and stores' stocks of butter ran out within minutes of delivery. A pack of butter would sell for between $40 to $200 on the black market. A friend of mine got the idea to drive over to the neighboring country, Sweden, to buy butter and sell it here in Norway. The problem was that you could only carry 100 packets of butter across the Norwegian border. So he made a deal with our local nursing home. He rented a bus and took 20 elderly people on a road trip to Sweden in exchange for receiving the butter quota. The next day, the butter crisis suddenly resolved, and he was left with 2,000 packets of butter he couldn't sell. He still got his basement full of butter. I swear to God, half of these just sound like Always Sunny plots. I really just thought that show was about hilarious East Coast white trash that couldn't survive in real life. Turns out it's a goddamn documentary about self-starters the world over. Thanks for submitting your story on It's Always Sunny in the Nordic Countries. A small family bar and restaurant that I worked for back in high school, which was bought by a local couple. He was a retired insurance company exec of some kind that played golf all day, and she was a stuck-up witch of a woman that had never worked a day in her life and who looked down on all of the restaurant's employees as some kind of uneducated lower life form. The place was located in a small town, and the clientele were mostly local farmers taking their families out in the evenings, factory workers at lunchtime, and on Sunday mornings retired elderly people on fixed incomes who would mob the place after church. The restaurant up to that point was profitable. I'm sure they liked the financials they saw on paper, or they wouldn't have invested in it. However, once they took over, they decided to, quote, improve it. There was one elderly couple in their 90s who'd been coming in every Sunday morning for years who had no teeth. They always ordered the same thing: 2 hot roast beef sandwiches with mashed potatoes and extra gravy, run through a blender, served in a bowl so they could eat it with a spoon. We were now forbidden to do that since the new owner thought it looked gross and didn't fit the image of their fine dining establishment, so the couple stopped coming in as they couldn't eat roast beef any other way. Beer was no longer served in bottles at the tables. If you wanted beer in the bottle, you had to go sit at the bar. At the table, it was poured into a glass before being served. Some people really didn't like that new rule and stopped coming in. There were plenty of other bars in the area to grab a burger at. The first thing the owners did was put an end to overtime pay. The staff consisted of about a dozen older, long-term employees that mostly lived nearby and walked to work because they couldn't afford cars. These people worked their tails off, some of them 7 days a week, for about minimum wage just to be able to afford their rent and groceries. Once they were told that they could no longer work 50 or 60 hours a week to make the maybe $25 a week in overtime, most of them had no choice but to quit and go find some place where they could make enough to survive. Pay them a little more? Heavens no, these are unskilled positions. The new owners found that when they advertised for new employees to fill the vacancies, they didn't get the flood of applicants that they'd expected. Waitresses, for example, were paid $1.70 an hour at the time, and cooks made $4. This was in the 1980s, and the local sewing factories paid more than that to start. So they ended up hiring a bunch of their daughter's high school friends, most of whom were the cheerleader crowd that didn't want anything to do with getting dirty, like scrubbing the floors or restrooms, and none of who could ever work on nights when there was cheerleading practice or a football game or pretty much any Friday or Saturday at all. So the place was chronically short-staffed constantly, orders came out slowly, and the new owner just sat at the bar fuming instead of doing anything to help, occasionally coming back to scream at everyone to stop goofing off and speed things up. Then, when business started to drop off, they decided to remodel to attract new customers. They tore all of the carpeting out of the bar area and replaced it with this ugly yellow vinyl flooring so the working man can come in and feel at home. Like regular people never had carpet in their houses. They added a char-broiler to the kitchen and decided they wanted to add char-broiled haddock to the menu. Have you ever tried to grill haddock? It falls apart in little pieces and looks awful. They decided this was obviously the fault of the 16-year-old kids they hired to make the food. At the same time, they remodeled the bar to make it look homey to the lower classes of people, and then they added expensive scotch and other high-end liquors to sell to the customers, most of whom were draft Budweiser and Miller drinkers. They also, as it turned out, rarely ordered quiche for lunch. The place lasted for about a year and then sat empty for about 10 years before someone new bought it, probably because they were trying to sell it for a huge profit after it was no longer an operating business. A guy I know got a small inheritance, enough for a deposit on a unit or a small house. Nope, seahorse farm. As it turns out, seahorses are very difficult to breed. Someone in Edmonton, Canada opened a dairy store, milk and cheese, and planted it across the street from a large grocery store. He hoped that shoppers would buy everything they needed at the grocery store except their milk and cheese, which the grocery store had an ample supply of, and make another trip to their store for milk and cheese. The place I'm talking about just supplied the same big dairy milk at the same prices and no fancy cheese. It was really only convenient when you only needed a carton of milk and didn't want to deal with a huge parking lot and the hassle of a massive store. So it didn't last. Monthly adult bedroom toy subscription. You'd get a different toy each month, which is an okay idea, I guess. There's one of those for everything nowadays. But the only problem this guy had is that he wanted the customers to eventually return the toy so he could pass it on to the next customer. He actually got into talks with an owner of a local toy shop to help him start, but the enthusiasm flattened out quite quickly. Maybe it's a sign that I should expand my friend network, but the narrator actually feels like he knows more than one person who had used this service. You'd hope that they'd go through a lot of sanitizer in that line of work, though. A loudmouth drunk, supposedly an ex-NFL player from way back, opened a fancy pizza place across the street from the small town's old favorite normal pizza place. It was a pretty obvious attempt to put the old place out of business and corner the lucrative small-town pizza market. The owner of the new place would get hammered and walk around to random tables to schmooze. He'd loudly hit on the ladies in front of their dates. It did have really good pizza, but it was horribly overpriced, and the portions were tiny. It went out of business pretty quick. We had a woman in town who started this bookstore/candy store combo. It was just weird, and I'm not sure what it was trying to be. It was a bunch of kids' books and then a whole bunch of handmade, weird chocolates, and not even stuff that would be appealing to kids. Stuff like green tea chocolate, chili pepper chocolate, super dark chocolate, among others. There were tables to eat the chocolates, but then you couldn't look at the books because your hands would be dirty. The whole thing was just bizarre. Strangely, it did stay open for a year, and in fairness, the lady who owned it truly was a sweetheart. People loved her. She was an older, super kind, super chatty lady. But the business was, well, not sustainable. A guy I know bought 150 grand in fidget spinners at the height of the craze. It took months to ship out from China, and by the time all of his crap had arrived, the mania had ended, and the retail price was already near his original wholesale price. The frickin' guy still has fidget spinners today. I guess he might eventually do okay on it, but my god. A digital camera that looks like a classic Japanese 35mm point-and-shoot. The memory card, which looks like a 35mm film roll and only has space for 36 images, has to be sent away like in the old days to get developed into prints that are mailed back a week later. This is currently on Kickstarter at time of writing. My dad has been in hundreds of pyramid schemes. When I was a kid, he'd always describe how the pyramid worked, and I'd help him with his meetings. It took me a long time to figure out his get-rich plans were really schemes. He still does them. He's never been rich off them, though. One was Excel, a super cancer-beating fruit juice. Then you give me 5 grand, then you get 5 people to give you 5 grand, then they get their own people to give 5 grand. A specialty chocolate shop. It only sold the exact same standard candy bars as any supermarket, but with less range and at 4 times the price. I asked the manager if he had Lindt chocolate balls, an upmarket but well-known product, and he said, "What are those?" Also, there was a supermarket 2 doors down. Someone in my neighborhood opened an artisanal hot dog restaurant called Everyone's Frank about a decade ago. My dad and I went in once at about 6 p.m. on a Saturday. We were the only customers, so the owner, who was working the register, chatted us up. He talked about his plans to expand the business to about 15 locations, which was completely delusional. He also talked about how much he spent on the interior redesign, which was pointlessly fancy. The hot dogs cost $9 and tasted terrible. We never went back, and the place was bankrupt within 6 months. My dad always said they'd gone Frankrupt. I have a friend whose family has gotten involved in multiple pyramid schemes, and every single time they get into a new pyramid scheme, they claim it's not a pyramid scheme. No, you don't get it. I am the boss. Once I produce 5 clients for my mentor, then I get to keep all my new clients, and they have to get me 5 new clients each. It's people helping people. What salesperson self-owned and lost your business? I've begun researching my next car. I'm not looking to make a purchase for the next few months, but I like to do my homework. I had a couple of meetings cancel on me one day, so I decided to run by the closest Hyundai dealer to see their new hybrids in person. I'm currently a Honda guy. I had a great conversation with the actual salesman, a good test drive, and he understood my plans. We returned to the dealership and I grabbed a booklet on the Ioniq as he went to take the keys back and find me a business card. In the meantime, his sales manager approached me and asked 4 times, "What do I need to do to get you to leave in a new Hyundai?" Refusing to listen to what both the salesman and I were saying. To top the visit off, the manager grabbed my hands and began to pray that I would wise up and get a Hyundai. Over the next 36 hours, I received 11 phone calls and text messages from the dealership, attacking me about getting back in to buy and eventually accusing me of only going in for the test drive gift card promotion that I wasn't aware of. I was at a furniture store looking for a new dresser. I found one for a reasonable price and might have come back after doing some more shopping around if the salesman hadn't tried to upsell a couch despite me saying repeatedly that we do not need a couch. That's why I like IKEA. It's cold and impersonal, which should incidentally be Sweden's national motto. But then what will Finland's be? Cold, impersonal, and violently drunk. A car salesman told me the van I was looking to buy had brand new brakes and tires. God man, pick something less obvious to lie about. I just went back to the van, checked, and sure enough the tires were almost bald and the rotors were grooved to the touch. He got his manager involved and now they're trying to convince me that the work was done. Like how? But I'm apparently an idiot. They didn't say that, but they knew I caught them in the lie, so I just left. This experience was the last straw and it convinced me to buy a brand new car instead. The narrator has done a bit of pre-reading and it seems like the absolute worst of our stories are mostly car dealer related. Which just goes to show what many of you have been writing in the comments is correct. Half the people working in dealerships are basically your high school bullies after finding out they weren't qualified to do anything else. Asked a Subaru salesman what the best price he could give me was on a 2014 Crosstrek with 40k miles. He told me the same price that a brand new one goes for. I informed him of that and asked why I'd buy this one for that price instead of just buying a new one. All he said was that they hold their value really well. That was the end of my search at that dealership. I love Subarus. My experience at the dealership was similar. I'd researched online, even emailed back and forth with the dealer and had a price set, but I needed to drive it first. Went in, drove the car, dealer came into me with a price $2,000 over the sticker price and $4,000 over what they'd agreed with online. I'd pulled up my email on the phone and showed it to the manager and left with the car for the price I wanted. But my god, I was livid when they pulled the over the sticker price BS. Called me about 20 times in the course of 3 days while we were in the ICU with our 3-year-old daughter due to a medical emergency. They wanted us to set up an appointment to get a roofing quote. We explained to them multiple times what had happened to stop and would call them back, but they kept calling. I finally went off on the poor lady who called the final time and she apologized so much, but the damage was done and we never called back that particular service. I had a salesman ask to speak to my husband instead of me, as he would never let his wife handle such a big financial decision. Did that go as well as I think it did? Oh, much worse. When I was just out of school and looking for my own car insurance, my dad helped me narrow down companies and contacted an agent for me to get the ball rolling. The agent called me to go over things, but then started trying to upsell me a renter policy on top of the auto policy. Oh, your dad asked me to also set this up for you. No, he didn't. Lying is not a good way to get business from me. Went to a Honda dealership to look at a Civic, and the sales guy told me that they didn't have any in stock somehow. He showed me an Accord, which was nice and all, but I was looking for something cheaper and with better MPG. He tried to convince me to buy it by saying it was heavier, which meant it was more reliable. I laughed at him and left. Told the car salesman that I wanted my wife to look at the car so I'd be coming back. He went and got the sales manager, who proceeded to sit down across from me and say the words I won't forget. Let me ask you a question. Whose money is it, yours or hers? I looked at him in shock and politely stood up and left. Never been so stunned by a salesman before or since. Years ago, my sister-in-law, my brother's girlfriend at the time, was looking at apartments with her best friend. At one location, one of them asks some oddly specific questions about something, like do the pipes make noise at night, and the landlord replied, "Is this in regards to the alleged haunting?" He started hitting on my wife, thinking the minivan was for her. What a fool. He should have been hitting on you the whole time. You can do all kinds of things back here, maybe even with the guy who'll sell it to ya. Wink. We felt really talked into the whole thing, and when he was finally lining up the paperwork, he high-fived his manager. We walked away. I was trying to buy a Honda and apply the Honda graduate program. Was signing papers for the keys when I noticed the missing amount. The sales manager told me I was getting such a good deal they couldn't add that on top. So I stopped signing and told him I'm no longer buying and won't be negotiating. The look on his face was excellent as I got up to leave. I got an even better deal no more than a week later. Looking at some lower-end sporty cars, I know my way around a motor. A guy pops the hood and says, "We like to leave everything exactly the way it was when we buy it from someone. It has a cheap falling-apart intake, oil spilling from both valve covers. I get inside, there's sticky black stuff around the shifter, the car smells, but damn, they couldn't even be bothered to clean the damn car or spray in some Febreze. You'd be surprised at how common this is. Dealers love to cut corners on trade-ins and will do the bare minimum, sometimes not even that, to get the car on the lot. The sales manager at the dealer I used to work at got in a huge fight with one of the mechanics because the mechanic was inspecting a trade-in and found many serious mechanical problems. By that, I mean problems that would lead to the engine catching fire or the driver getting stranded on the side of the road. The manager told the mechanic not to fix these problems, but instead cover them up to the best of his ability. The mechanic refused to comply and a screaming match ensued. The manager ended up getting someone else to do the cover-up job. That's why it's really important to have an experienced mechanic or at least a knowledgeable car person inspect a used car before you decide to buy it. When I was in the army, I went to Best Buy to buy a car stereo. After picking one out and talking to the sales rep while we waited for another rep to grab the radio from the back, the rep I was talking to started talking to me about God and how women are demons and I need to stay away from them. At this point, I didn't really know what to say, so I just tried to change the subject. He then asked me if I had a girlfriend. I told him yes, but she's been in Afghanistan for the last 6 months. He then told me that her being deployed is a blessing in disguise because now she won't tempt me into committing sin. I just walked out after that. I was too shocked to actually say anything. I was at the VW dealership and told him I was also thinking of looking at Hyundai. The salesman told me to think twice, because if I get a Hyundai, I'd better also get good insurance, because I'm going to crash and or die in that car. I got a new salesman, and I still got a VW. I can imagine that this is something a salesman could possibly allude to happening at the very end of a sales pitch if they feel like their customer's about to walk away and they have nothing to lose anyway. Even then, it's a bit weird, but opening with that is just hilariously bold and a wild thing to do. On an unrelated note, if you don't watch all of the videos on our channel, you will get diabetes and or die. Allegedly. Don't fact check. My dad and I were out shopping for my first car. Me being 16 and stupid, I found a used Challenger that I wanted desperately. And to my immense surprise, my dad agreed to co-sign for me. As my dad and I were negotiating the price of the car and what things the dealership could add to sweeten the deal, the salesman implies that I, my father's 16-year-old daughter, was his other woman, and that my 42-year-old father was going through a midlife crisis. My father went white as a sheet, and then the same beautiful cherry red of the Challenger. And needless to say, I did not get that car. Instead of getting a cool car that I would have inevitably gotten a surplus number of speeding tickets with, I bought my aunt's '99 Ford Explorer. After replacing parts of the AC system, it runs like a champ. I love that SUV. Yes, the insurance would have been absolutely astronomical if I'd actually managed to get the Challenger. In hindsight, I'm fairly certain it was my dad attempting to show me how to buy a car from a dealership. 16-year-old me thought he was cool as heck for at least entertaining the idea. And no, my father is not Roy Moore. We're from Georgia, not Alabama. You've got to wait till they're 18 to boink your relatives in Georgia. We went to buy an engagement ring, and the salesman looked at me right when we walked in the door and said, "We don't sell children's rings here." I was 27 at the time, and yes, petite. We went elsewhere. I'm a girl. My boyfriend got me into motorcycles a few years back, and I was determined to buy my own. Once I had the money for one, we went to a handful of dealerships around town. Only one guy at one of the dealerships actually talked to me about buying a bike. Everyone else would look straight at my boyfriend and answer the questions I was asking. There were several places we ended up walking away from even if we knew that they had a decent option for me, all because they didn't believe that I actually knew enough of what I was talking about to buy my own bike. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. GNC. I told the guy I was looking for a pre-workout and he asks what I usually use. I told him and he literally laughed at me, then shows me a bunch of new brands that cost about twice as much. Meanwhile, he's throwing out a bunch of scientific nutritional terms. I left and I haven't been back. Not me, but my parents. My mum and dad were meeting with a sales guy who worked for a pool company when they were looking to get a pool built. He was a standard sales guy and at one point he tried to mention some add-on or something. My mum started to interject and the sales guy was basically like, "Oh, don't you worry. Why don't your husband and I talk about the money details?" He said a few other things along those lines and was overly condescending. The whole, how about you sit tight while the men talk business, sort of mentality. My mum looked at the guy for a second, then to my dad, and then stood up and said, "You know what, I think we're done here." As she and my dad stood up to leave, the sales guy apparently kind of stammered, then smirked, looked at my dad and said, "Oh, come on, okay, let's continue," thinking it was some kind of joke. My dad responded, "Nope, you heard my wife, we're out of here." And that was that. I was broke but desperately needed a new car, so I went down to a local dealership to see if they had anything with a monthly payment that I could afford. I handed over the keys to my car so they could do an appraisal, but I didn't even get a chance to fully explain my situation before they were shoving me in an Infiniti I knew was beyond my price range. I test drove it just to humor the sales guy while explaining that I needed something cheaper than this, but he just kept saying, "We'll see how the financing works out." We get back to the dealership and he tells me he wants to run my credit. The pushiness has already turned me off completely, so I've already decided I'm not buying from them. I tell him no. He looks at me like I just threw number 2 in his face. "You won't let me run your credit," he said with stunned incredulity. And then he started calling out to the other salesman. "He won't let me run his credit. Can you believe that?" The other salesmen all shared his shock like I was committing some unforgivable insult by not letting him run my credit. Next thing I know, I'm being herded into a manager's office where he starts giving me the spiel about how I clearly don't appreciate how much they're trying to help me out. "But I don't want the car," I said. He continued on like I said nothing, telling me how they're trying to help me out and how I don't realize what a great deal they can make me. I finally had enough, so I said, "Listen, I'm not buying that car from you, and at this point there's nothing you could say or do to get me to buy any car from you, so give me back the keys so I can go somewhere else." And then he actually said to me, "I'll give you the keys back when I'm ready." He realized almost immediately that he had screwed up though, because as soon as he said it, he got up and went and got my keys. At that point, I was so enraged that I probably would have punched him if he hadn't got up to get them immediately. I drove off and never went back. In short, went used car shopping, and used car salesmen tried to bully and intimidate me into buying a car that I didn't want and couldn't afford anyway. I went with my wife to buy a car. The salesman said that another couple were also looking to buy it, but he'd prefer us to have it because they were homosexuals. He even said, "Homosexuals," in that stereotypical gay voice and went limp-wristed. I hope those guys are happy with their car. I hope those guys bought a car somewhere else. The narrator also hopes that that awful man didn't get any money from anyone, especially the people he was slandering in his place of work, and that the people he said it to complained to his manager. Although, as we've established, his boss probably would have laughed and high-fived him. If you're one of the non-reprehensible car salesmen of the world, the narrator apologizes for his slander. Your place of work just seems to come up with so many of these stories. Went to look at a car. Salespeople saw me and went into the office, an interesting tactic since they normally come out and ask if they can help. So I open up and look inside, look for rust in the usual spots like under the wheel arches, look at the color of the exhaust, and inspect the window rubbers, which looked to be a bit dodgy, and then I lie down to get a good look underneath. It's used, so I wanted to see if there was oil leaking from the front or rear. When the guy finally walks up to me and asks if he can call me an ambulance, he made some snarky comment about me lying on the ground. At this point, I was put off, but they'd made me wait about 20 minutes before coming out, so I took it for a test drive. When the guy gave me the sales spiel on the car, there were 3 main points on the car. We were driving and he gets a phone call. He didn't notice I saw the screen that said office phone when it rang, and he proceeds to talk as if he's talking to a customer who's coming to buy the car in 15 minutes' time. He repeats the 3 sales items and then carries on talking as if the guy is very keen. They're so obvious. I hate dealing with used car salesmen. An ADT security salesman at my door. I was actually contemplating it, but said I'd take the info and talk to my wife. Do you have to get her permission for everything? I paused and went wide-eyed and then said, I talk to my wife about financial decisions. Get the frick off my property. I had a phone salesman call me up and try to get me to extend my phone plan. If you sign up now, you also get a laptop. What kind of laptop? It's red. I had a car salesman tell me, debt is a good thing. It'll teach you how to manage your money, when I objected to $3,000 worth of upgrades. I asked him if this was what he told all of his 22-year-old female clients or if I was just special. He declined to answer. Looking at a wedding venue. It was lovely, the sort of place we were looking to get wed, and the price was okay. But the saleswoman just did a bad job. This is where you and your groomsmen can hang out before the wedding. It's our man cave. He'll be kept out of the way in the man cave. You can have beers with your boys in the man cave. Beers with the boys. She just kept dropping these phrases in. They were a bit stupid to start with, but it was nothing but offensive and grating by the end. It totally turned me off the whole place, and my now wife agreed with me. It felt patronizing, artificial, and just lazy. At a Honda dealership when I had to ask for the keys to my car back for the third time. I only started cursing when I asked the fourth time. Yes, the deal he offered me was great. Even looking back, I was probably foolish for walking away from it, but I told him the moment I met him and reiterated several times that I wouldn't be making a purchase that day. I foolishly handed over my keys so that they could do an appraisal on my current car, which I knew they'd only give me $500 for. I knew that going in there, no matter what I did, I was going to go home and think about it overnight. I bought a Toyota down the street 2 days later. For me, it wasn't the salesman, but the financing guy. I was out car shopping and found one I liked at the first place I went. But of course, I wanted to check out a couple of other places. They were pushing an interest financing thing. I wasn't planning on doing financing at all, but for zero interest, I could just let my salesman get that and then just pay it all off a week later. So the salesman suggested I just chat with the finance guy before I left. That guy was a freaking member. Acted like I was some huge jerk for wanting to actually look into more than one car before making a big purchase like that, and just wouldn't stop. I generally try not to be rude to people who are just trying to do their jobs, but I had to leave his office while he was talking because he would not stop. Told the salesman on the way out that if I didn't come back, finance jerk was why. I was looking to buy solar panels for my house. I got one consultation from a really nice sales lady who was very friendly, but completely knew her stuff inside and out. She had done her research, had printouts of my house's roof from Google Earth, showed me how many panels they'd lay out, among other things. I told her I was going to get a few other quotes, and she said it was perfectly fine, please just let her know what I decided. So I called around and set up 3 other quotes. First 2 were fine, just more expensive or not as good terms overall. The third place, though, Varango Solar. Yikes. I got a call from their sales guy who refused to come to the property, said he could do it all from the office. So he looks at the roof printout and tells me that he can offer about 2/3 of the panels as the other companies did, and I ask why, and he says, basically, because. So I say 3 other companies are offering between 17 to 18 panels, whereas he's only going to do 13. He claims they're wrong and gives me some nonsense reasoning. I say, okay, well at least they're cheap. So I tell him thanks, I'm going to go cover all of my options and I'd call him in a few days. I got calls from him every day for the next 3 days. After 2 days of still thinking, he comes back to me and says he's figured out how the other companies got more panels on the roof. They rotated them differently. Go fricking figure. On the 3rd day, I said I wasn't interested, thank you. So I got a call that same day from his manager asking why I wasn't interested. I told him that even though they were the cheapest, their inept sales attitude and extremely pushy manner from every person I'd talked to there made me never want to do business with them ever. He tried to talk me out of my fricking opinion, and I calmly told him to never fricking call back again, please, and hung up. Meanwhile, the nice lady at the other company, now Sunrun, hadn't bothered me once. I called her and said let's do it, and I haven't regretted it one day since. She worked her butt off to get me a very close price to the cheapest option, even after I told her I was going with her company. It ended up only being like $300 more than Varango Solar. How did you hack the system and get a good grade for no effort? Oh, let me tell you the tale of my grammatically challenged roommate at the time. We were instructed to write a how-to paper for sophomore English class. We had to pick our topics during class and tell the teacher. Someone sitting close to us came up with the topic of how to write an A paper, so naturally my friend goes with how to write an F paper. His intentions were to write it as best as he could and receive an A. He wrote it so poorly and with multiple spelling and grammatical errors that the teacher, quote, loved the satirical vibe that he'd demonstrated in his paper and promptly gave him an A. In first year university, I wrote a paper in a sociology class where I mixed up the word mores, a type of social norm, and moray, a type of eel, and as such wrote about the impact of eels on law. For some reason, the teacher's assistant thought that my eel law paper wasn't too horrible and gave me a B. She told the entire class that someone wrote about social eels and that we needed to be more careful with our spelling, though. I had a college professor where I just didn't turn in my final and he gave me an A for the class anyways. Not sure why. I gave him some duck jerky earlier in the year, so maybe he really liked that. Wow, I guess duck jerky is what the kids are saying now. What has the world come to? I mean, that guy was 100% sure he had lost your exam. He probably thought he lost it and didn't want to deal with it, so he gave you an A. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. I left one high school shortly after semester break, and all teachers gave me an A because they didn't have anything to go on. Went to another state, and they were so far into the semester that all the teachers decided that they couldn't hold me responsible for what they already taught, so they all gave me whatever grade I came in with. The only time in my life I got all A's. Turned in the same essay twice and got 2 different grades. I did the same with a sculpture. He went on and on about the clear improvements in craftsmanship since last week. I smiled and nodded. I had that with an old boss. She'd never signed the first or second document I bought her, so I'd prepare the one I wanted signed and a backup. I'd give her the real one, wait for her to check it back, give her the dummy one, she'd kick it back, and then I'd resubmit the initial one unchanged and she'd sign it. God, she was awful. Part of me would love to see these professors and bosses brought to task for their clearly moronic practices and habits that, if followed, are just going to create more work when they clearly aren't checking properly to begin with. But on the other hand, unless you get the rest of the workplace or classmates involved to all go at once, all you're doing is making things difficult for yourself when they get a reprimand and treat you like crap for the rest of your time there. My senior year of high school, I was taking Spanish 12, or the senior level course. I'd been taking yearly Spanish courses since 7th grade at this point, so you'd think I'd be bueno by now. But no. No, I was not bueno. For our final presentation, we had to discuss any topic we wanted for a full 15 minutes. Obviously, all in Spanish. I knew I'd struggle, but I tried all year to actually improve, and I did not. Anyway, I did my presentation on the Oregon Trail computer game. You remember that? It was awesome. I played through and grabbed screenshots of different stages. I named my players after my friends in class. I went the full nueve, you could say. One flaw, I didn't have the vocabulary for a 15-minute speech on my game, so I tried to cheat. Each slide was well done, but what I said was the exact same with small changes. Mi familia es, and then a verb. I even wrote note cards and hid them in my crotch while I sat and pretended they were hidden. I read off them because remembering like 8 verbs was beyond me. Mucho trabajo. I ended up with a grade that would allow me to pass and leave language courses the rest of the year. My teacher knew I was an idiot and gave me a slide, I'm convinced. So I thought I could do the same next semester and signed up for Spanish 13. Easy college credit, I thought. I walked in. Same teacher. She took one look at me and wrote a pass to my counselor. You aren't taking this, butt leak. Go find a business course or something. So I did. Now I have a marketing degree that I don't use. Life is crazy, man. I had a bit of a weird teacher in geography way back when I was in the 9th grade. He was always correcting our assignments way too long after we handed them in. One time we had 2 assignments that should have been handed in over the course of 2 weeks. I only did one of them as I didn't really feel like doing the other one for some reason. When we got the assignments back like a month later or something, he didn't actually hand them back out to us, he just told us our grades from a piece of paper he was reading from. When he got to my desk, he gave me a B for the first one and an A for the one I didn't hand in. I don't think I deserved that. English 101. I forgot that an essay was due that following afternoon, but I had to work and study for a more important chemistry course. Downloaded the smallest JPEG I could find, converted it into a PDF, and submitted this essay in the hopes that my professor would ask me to send it again, and it would give me a buffer time of 24 to 48 hours. I checked the grade module and I got full points. No questions asked. I took biology and economics my freshman year of college, and I made the mistake of doing both classes in the morning. I worked a graveyard shift. The biology class was graded solely on 3 exams. The dates for them were in the syllabus, along with a summary of chapters covered in each. I only showed up on the first day and 3 exam days, crammed the night before, and did really well on the tests. Got an A. Economics was harder. Participation and attendance counted towards the grade, and a test date was moved, so I missed taking it. Fortunately, I had a buddy in the class who signed my name on the attendance sheet that day, and therefore I was able to convince my professor that he must have lost my exam. He let me retake it, and I eked out a B. The professor definitely knew something wasn't right. He repeated several times that he had never lost a student's work before and wondered aloud why it was only mine. Generally, assignments are all kept together. To my credit, I did get defensive, and retaking the test was his suggestion, not mine. One other factor that might have played into things was the fact that this was a community college, not exactly the land of the academically upwardly mobile. Within the first couple of weeks of every term, half the class would stop showing up altogether and never be heard from again. I think he was just psyched that I gave enough of a crap to fight for a grade in his class. I once spent a full 2-hour period of a 9th grade class copying the questions slowly into another sheet of paper. It was a reading retention quiz or something. I guess she was only looking to see if you had written anything because I got full marks. The moral is, teachers are overworked and underpaid, and children's educations pay the price. Yes, that is also an important thing to consider here. Your takeaway from this video should not be all teachers are bad and lazy. Most of these individuals are probably struggling to do their enormous workloads and screw up the kids as little as possible while barely making ends meet, and they likely cut corners to try and make it work. Most, but not all, teachers deserve way more than they get. Sophomore year of college, I was taking a class that, about 2/3 of the way through the year, I totally checked out of. Rarely went to class, hardly ever paid attention when I did, just stopped caring. Leading up to the final, I of course now realized I knew none of the material. The final wasn't cumulative. I did the math and realized that I needed a 50% to pass the class with a C-. I showed up the day of the exam and realized I got the day wrong. My exam was the previous day. I emailed my professor in a panic and begged her for a chance to retake it or do some kind of extra credit, anything to get me a passing grade. No response. I go home for winter break assuming I'm going to have to retake the class. I haven't told my parents out of shame. Then 2 weeks later, my teacher finally replies. Her email went something like this. I'm so incredibly sorry, Paula. I left for vacation immediately after the exam and just now got back. It's obviously way too late for you to take the exam or do any kind of extra credit. The best I can do is take your current class average, an 89, and put that in for your exam grade. Would that be okay? So I get a B+ instead of the C- I was hoping for? Yes, that would be just fine, thank you. This is from college. It happened very recently. I take programming classes, and our mid-exam was to complete pre-written codes. The purpose of the code was to assign characteristics to a rocket. When the required characteristics are filled, the rocket will launch, and the completion status must be 100% for this to happen. If the completion status goes below 90%, the rocket won't launch. You get the idea. I was never good at programming. I understood the logic, but writing the codes down is like writing in an alien language. The exam was 2 hours, and in the span of 2 hours, my completion status was a mere 20%. My friends got 65, 80%, and even one was smart enough to change the pre-written codes and got 100%. I accepted the fact that I might fail this class, and I submitted my exam. I don't know exactly how the gods work up there, but I got a 95 on my mid-exam. Yes, 95. What the frick? I emailed the lecturer asking how I got such a score, and he said though I didn't get 100%, I implemented polymorphism into the codes, and he thought that was impressive. To this day, I still don't know what the frick polymorphism is, and how in the world I could have implemented it in my program. University, I had an 8 AM class that I would probably skip 1/3 of the time. I missed the day the midterm was given back, so I asked the professor to bring it to the next class. He starts to give me a hard time before looking at the exam and seeing the 100% written at the top and saying, "Good job." I go sit down, feeling pretty smart, and then go to glance through it before the class begins. For the main question, I see a couple of check marks, then triple question marks, nothing else for a page and a half, before the answer was circled with a check mark. Turns out I'd done the problem a wrong way, confused the teacher's assistant marking the test, and then somehow came to the correct answer at the end, so he just marked it completely correct. I had an essay that was explicitly due Tuesday in the 6th grade. I have no clue why it didn't click that it was due, not due, and only realized when my friends asked me about the essay on the bus. I told my teacher that I'd forgotten to print it out, ran home after the bus, typed it out in 15 to 30 minutes, and got a 97. This sadly started my habit of intense procrastination. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Picked a choice book. Had to do a project on it for honours English class. Didn't read it, mildly researched the book. Crapped out a pretty-looking PowerPoint, presented my fancy bullcrap book report in front of class and the teacher. Got an A-. In Year 9, or US Grade 8 history, we were given a small assignment as homework over the weekend. I can't remember what it was on, probably the Tudors or something, but it had to be about 500 words and summarize what we'd been doing for the past few weeks. Nothing too hard. I completed the homework to what I considered to be a reasonable standard and handed it in. However, when I received the grade, I was awarded a D, with the teacher's primary criticism being that I hadn't written enough material. I was confused by this since I'd written around 500 words like he'd asked. He told me to go away and redo it better. After getting home, I had some time to compare my work with my friends. I'd written the essay in size 11 font Times New Roman, and I'd neglected to include any images. This is pretty standard for higher grade academic work, but most of my peers had used size 14. Some even used Comic Sans. So what did I do? I scaled up the text, increased the spacing, and slapped a couple of generic pictures of Henry VIII's face on there and handed it in the next morning. Lo and behold, after he graded it, I got an A and a special mention for my hard work. I've never been so thrilled with myself and so disappointed in a teacher in my life. It just goes to show how another person's laziness can screw you over. My teacher yelled at the class for 10 minutes telling us how stupid we were. Turns out I had a 98 and everyone had to rewrite it. I got 99 a second time because he didn't believe in 100s. That last teacher is an absolute dinosaur. Sure, for some subjects, I get that there's no such thing as an objectively perfect essay, but you need to have a standard for something done as well as it possibly can be in your field. Those stupid professors who refuse on principle to give out A+ are even worse. Alright, to flip our subject matter, here's a bunch of answers from the other side of the coin. People who put in a lot of hard work and got absolutely shafted by their teachers. In my college dynamics course, we had a group project that we assigned different sections to do within our group. It was an incredibly difficult project, so we couldn't just completely split off and do it on our own, but there were 3 easier sections that could be done by one person. Anyways, in my group of 3, one of our guys just never showed up to any of our meetings. We're not jerks and we get that we're busy and all that, so we just give him the easiest stuff to do when he can get around to it. So my friend and I pull all-nighters until we finally complete it a few days before it was due. We send what we have to the 3rd guy and he assures us he'll get the rest done. We check up on him the day before, asking if he wants help, and he says that he's got it and he'll bring the completed project into class. Of course, he walks in and says, "Sorry guys, never got around to it." We're basically missing the easiest third of our project because he couldn't tell us he needed help. I explained the situation to the teacher, but he had no sympathy. He said, "In the real world, you live and die by the people at your side," and graded us for what we completed, so, surprise, we failed. I didn't talk to that kid for the rest of the semester, even though he sat right next to me. In high school, we were asked to write a proposal for a new drinking age in the United States. I wrote about how it should be lowered to 12, but people who are past 12 now should have to wait until their next birthday, as in to avoid millions of teenagers becoming suddenly legal age to drink at once. I cited other countries with lower drinking ages and fewer drinking-related issues, discussed how it currently has a strong forbidden fruit appeal to high school kids, and that wouldn't be as big a deal. Also, kids could get introduced to alcohol and learn their limits while still being somewhat supervised by their parents. She gave me a 0 and claimed I was making fun of the assignment. Apparently everyone else only lowered it to 18, citing if you can go to war you can drink a beer. Or they even raised it. I actually really enjoyed the assignment and thought I was being practical. Frick me, I guess. The qualifications to access university in Scotland are known as Highers. I took Higher English, but I'm kinda crap at English, but good enough to pass the exam. When our prelim, a sort of test, rolled around in February, I failed it by like 2%, and the teacher decided that I wasn't good enough to sit the higher exam. She'd keep me in the class, but when the exams came around, I'd sit the lower tier Intermediate 2 exam, which would give me a lower tier qualification which is useless for just about anything. I sat this exam and ended up getting an A. A useless frickin' A, which would be no help to getting me into any university, effectively wasting my whole year in that class. This was 13 years ago now, and I'm still annoyed. My film studies professor always stressed there are no wrong interpretations of a film, only different ones. She then proceeded to give me a 60% on an essay because, and I quote, "Your interpretation of the wrestler is simply incorrect. That's not the message the movie was trying to send." This was 10 years ago in the Midwest US. I took biology as a freshman in high school. There was this big bug collecting project that counted for like 40% of our first semester grade. Basically, we had to catch a bunch of bugs, kill them, pin them, and correctly label them with their scientific name. To get full credit, you had to catch a minimum of 30 unique bug species. The one thing I learned from that project that I still remember, I'm terrible at catching bugs. If you count the cricket I bought at the pet store, I managed 18 and received a D+ on the project. So despite earning A's on all of the tests and homework that semester, I earned a B in the class. You were punished for your unwillingness to kill for your overlords. Bad surf. In 5th grade, I was really excited to be assigned our first report for homework. Something about having to research and write up a few pages on the topic that made me feel like I was finally entering big kid school. Anyways, we had the weekend to do it, and my topic was tornadoes. They were randomly assigned, but I was pretty stoked to get a cool one. I spent all weekend doing research and writing up this 4 to 5 page paper on tornadoes with a picture or two thrown in. But I was really proud of it. I got a D because my teacher assumed my parents had done it for me and wouldn't discuss the matter. It wasn't up for a debate in any way. I've never been so crushed. Really killed whatever love I had to learn that year. I still did well in school, but my enthusiasm about learning and doing research on my own was never the same after that. I was in an upper-level political science class that had essay tests. The professor asked us questions and wanted us to explain the answers. Not bad. So I filled in 5 out of the 8 pages in a blue book and turned in my exam, positive I'd aced it. I received a 63%, and when I asked the professor why, he said that although all of my answers were correct, other people had filled in 8 out of 8 pages, and he had to grade all of the tests relative to each other. Ugh. Quality, not quantity, should be the focus, surely. To a reasonable point. Surely, as a teacher, having shorter, better assignments is a plus, right? I'd want to encourage it. Let's get back to some grade hacks. Me and another guy I didn't know too well got assigned a joint presentation on a topic I can't quite remember. I think something to do with tourism in the outdoor industry. We did very little prep work after being assigned the task. Probably 80% of the PowerPoint was made in the hour right before the seminar. We rushed together about 10 slides with info copied from Wikipedia, decided which slides we'd each talk through, and left it at that. The presentation went pretty much flawlessly. We somehow managed to confidently blag our way through each slide as if we knew the topic by heart. When one of us would falter, the other one would jump in with some more bullcrap to cover. Come to the Q&A at the end, and we totally pulled it out of our butts to the point where the lecturer praised us for being so well prepared. I guess confidence is key. In the end, we got the equivalent of a B+. Definitely did not deserve that grade. I got the same grade as everyone else on a group project that crashed and burned spectacularly. I was the only person who did any work while the other 8 members of the group messed around. The group agreed with me and signed a letter saying I deserved an A for the work I put in and they'd done nothing. The teacher agreed and gave me a better grade. I did my senior project on building a computer. Like putting together a gaming rig from parts you'd buy on Newegg or Amazon. Since people think that's an impressive thing, I was able to get by with it no problem. The best part is that I'd already built it. I just assembled it, took pictures of myself putting it back together, talked about how to decide on what parts to get, the core components you need, among other things. I got a perfect grade. I had a Geology 101 class nicknamed Rocks for Jocks. The final was 5 to 7 p.m. on a Friday. We were warned that this was scheduled on day 1, there were to be no exceptions. All finals were to be done and grades to be in by midnight, so anyone graduating would know if they passed that night. During the semester, the professor had a breakdown at the beginning of class. He was using his own money to publish class notes on the web. The school would not compensate him. He then found out he was not only the lowest paid geology professor on campus, he found out he was the lowest paid teaching geologist, period. After his meltdown, he continued on, but his notes were no longer published. Everyone in the class got a B+. I asked people if they thought they should have gotten higher or lower, and nobody thought a B+ was right, but that's a grade most won't complain about. I doubt those finals were ever graded. Another slacker and I were assigned to make a poster on the socialism chapter in The Grapes of Wrath, include quotes and symbolism. We're both very bright, but even more lazy, so we kept putting it off until suddenly it was our turn to present. Thinking quickly, we had a palaver and agreed on a plan. It was a short chapter, and he was a theatre kid, so he'd read the entire chapter out loud while I explained socialism as everyone doing their part and asked the whole class to come up and draw something on the whiteboard. So he got up front and he kicks a desk forward, stands on top of it and starts reading while I do my thing. By the end, the teacher was in tears and the smart kids that weren't slackers fumed because they knew what had really happened. But hey, extra credit! In short, spur-of-the-moment decision-making leads to extra credit for everyone else doing the work. Which franchise has betrayed their fans the hardest? God, anyone who's a fan of any Konami game has had it really hard. You love Metal Gear? We're firing the creator. That Silent Hill game we're making with Guillermo del Toro? Cancelled. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have to go and make pachinko machines out of your favorite video games instead of making actual video games. Cleveland Browns. Fire every head coach every 2 years except for the one who went 1-31. My name is Earl? Anyone? How the frick are you going to end on a crazy cliffhanger like that? The show was silly and all, but you got really attached to the characters and you hoped for the best for them. The creator of the show, Greg Garcia, did do an Ask Me Anything a while back and explained the cliffhanger and what the end of the show was supposed to be. Long story short, Earl, Junior's father, was going to be someone famous and that Earl wasn't going to finish the list, but instead he runs into someone doing their own list and finds out his list caused people to have their own lists. He then tears up his list and lives the rest of his life with good karma. In almost every fanfiction posted before 2010, you'll find a disclaimer that says something like, "I do not own the characters within, they belong to the author." I always thought that was so stupid, like, of course you don't own Spock. Apparently, people started doing that after the author of The Vampire Chronicles made threats of legal action against fanfiction authors who were creating not-for-profit works of fiction because they just loved the series. Fanfictions can be really long too, like almost as long as books or longer. I can't imagine working so hard on something you truly love and then receiving notice that the creator wants to sue you because of it. People who live in the 48 states left on Sufjan Stevens promised to record an album for each state. Tool have said that their album is not far away for the last 5 years. This was written in 2017. Man, System of a Down fan here, I feel ya. There was a 90s computer-animated show called Reboot. The series had a good run, but a trilogy of movies ended on a cliffhanger. Reboot has since been rebooted. The trailer is bad. Very bad. So the narrator did like Reboot growing up and was completely unaware of this reboot of Reboot. Let me just say I have now watched the trailer and I'm just a little bit less happy about living on this planet than I already was. I don't see Spore written on here, but let me tell you that situation felt really crappy for me. Spore was a game that was meant to be sim life realized. Before the release, when we got those first videos of the microbial, sea life, and land life, simulator fans went nuts. This was our game. We're a niche of gamers that basically never gets catered to, and here came Maxis to deliver the sim game of the century. The fan page was literally filled with hypothetical species people were going to make, with whole textbook entries as to where and how this species lived. There were arboreal animals in trees, cave animals, deep-sea filter feeders, everything. And then Spore came out. The animal portion got dumbed down a whole lot. Basically, all animals behaved the same except some chewed on fruit and danced with other species, and some murdered and ate other species. You built creatures by digging up fossils and unlocking random bits. Yeah. And everything was bound to land pretty much and nested on the ground. No interesting life cycles or niches, just whacking things to death and dancing with the neighbors. The whole ocean part was just flat out removed, and if you dared venture into the water, you got chomped up by the fricking swamp creature's kaiju cousin. And all that innovative animal sim stuff was basically cut to make room for the most watered-down rip-off of other games imaginable. Watered-down crappy RTS, watered and double-watered-down crappy Civilization-style city stage, 2 unmemorable, boring filler stages everyone hated to act as filler for the space age, which was just you floating around in a spaceship terraforming planets and making colonies so they could get attacked by pirates, and crap all so you could fight your way to the center of the galaxy and get a rod that lets you terraform a couple more planets for free? Some of the space stuff was sort of fun, but I would have happily cut all of it to keep the animal evolution and ecosystem sim and made that a complete game. Instead, we got an unmemorable disappointment that became the poster child for spreading your game too thin. And we've never seen anything like the original Spore promise. I'd say probably the Sonic fanbase feels the worst, given how many horrible Sonic games there have been. A Song of Ice and Fire series fans. We'll never get closure. Every time I see that Martin dude experiencing something that isn't writing, I taste true hatred. If we're on the subject of authors, then the third book of the Kingkiller Chronicles from Patrick Rothfuss. He talks about how the first 3 are prequels, but it's taken him 15 years and we still don't have those, so... Fans of the Sim games. Sim 4 has DLC for DLC. One of the DLCs for the DLC includes a much-loved feature from the base game of The Sims 3, Create a Style, that was stripped from the base game of Sims 4. Fans of Sherlock, the show, and they don't even know it. Season 4 was a burning dumpster fire. It's like they were writing fanfiction for the Mary Sueist Mary Sue. Fans of the show Dexter. I don't think I'll ever get over the cancellation of Silent Hills, especially since it's pretty clear to me that we'll never get another game in the series, and we'll probably never even get a decent HD release of the past games. X-Files fans. This last season was a joke. The finale had me livid. No wonder Gillian Anderson said she's done. Frick you, Chris Carter. As much as I would have loved to see some more well-done episodes, it just didn't happen. This thing needs to be put out to pasture. Having said that, if they did episodes with no overarching storyline, just all unconnected and basically random cases with no connection, and really explored some strange phenomena, would anyone else be interested? 'Cause I would. You know what? I'm gonna go with Bleach, the manga. I hadn't been into it too deep to care, but from what I've heard, the writer rushed to the ending and stretched out the latter half for way too long, leaving a crap ton of characters' fates unanswered along with an equally crappy ton of plot holes. Futurama. I just want Fry and Seymour to finally both actually know what really happened. Philip J. Fry is a tragic character. Fans of The Walking Dead got done dirty. How I Met Your Mother fans stuck with it through a rough final season just to be given a gosh-awful finale that broke up Barney and Robin in all of 2 seconds after building their relationship for such a long time and returned Barney to his old self after so much development. Not to mention the dead mother in the show called How I Met Your Fricking Mother. Ugh, I was actually on board with the final season by the end. Robin and Barney was meh, but by the end I bought them as a couple. Then the finale just completely undoes all of that because… I wasn't too upset by the mother's death, to be honest. It was a reminder that not everyone has a happy ending, but we should still enjoy it while we can. What annoyed me was the fact that they peed all over Ted's growth and finally realizing him and Robin were never meant to be and letting her go, by just bringing him straight back to where he started like he learned nothing over the course of the entire show. I mean, there was literally a scene of her floating away. How much more on the nose could they have gotten? Add into that the Barney and Robin stuff, and that finale was such a piece of garbage. The Kingkiller Chronicles. I don't want Rothfuss to force a book he doesn't feel is ready, but he was plugging the 10th anniversary edition of Book 1. You're gonna charge people a lot of money for a fancy edition of a book in a series you won't even talk about completing anymore? Him and JRRM have put me off reading any unfinished series. Yeah. The narrator occasionally checks up on Rothfuss's Twitter to see where he is and sees him streaming video games or playing D&D or whatever, and it's like, I'm happy for you, but man, I would love that final book you're always saying you're working on sometime. Oh well. Half-Life fans. I've been doing this since Half-Life 1 was in magazines, and I was so excited by the sci-fi shooting game, I installed Steam before Half-Life 2 came out. I watched Gabe go from, we're moving to episodic content in order to release games quicker, to releasing 2 fantastic games relatively quickly, to quite possibly the most painful cliffhanger of my life. It's made worse by the fact that the end of episode 2 gives you a ton of hints and hooks about some of the prime mysteries in the world, in an astounding first for the entire series, and now we've been left hanging with absolutely no closure for about 10 years. It would be one thing if they said, officially it's not coming, but they haven't. Just an endless stream of no comments and we aren't discussing that at this time, breaking my heart more and more. I'm nearly 30 years old and I get way more bothered about this than I should, but I can almost trace a line directly back to that kid in elementary school salivating over a PC gamer, to the teen who rode his bike to 2 different EB games to get the G-Man box, then to that guy fresh out of school playing through episode 2, to the adult sitting here medicated on green herb, typing about how badly he wants some real closure. Epistle 3 is almost closure, but real closure is we aren't making Half-Life 3, or Half-Life 3 releases on this date. Halo 5 no couch co-op? Come on. Honestly, 343 Industries ruined Halo. The franchise lost its touch, and with each new game it feels more and more like an average FPS. I can't believe Bungie would go give up Halo so they could work on that sweaty pile of crap that is the Destiny franchise. Honestly, I was still on board after Halo 4, even if I didn't like the new enemies very much, since I liked the story taking new, darker, and more narrative turns, including that one thing that happens at the end. Then Halo 5 comes out and retcons the tragic and meaningful ending of 4 within minutes, and had a plot that felt pointless. Not to mention that advertised the whole thing about Chief going rogue and Locke trying to take him down. Then in the actual game, it just turned out Locke was following him to find out what was happening, and was just confused the whole time. They have like a 5-second fight at one point, and even then it's just a misunderstanding. I would normally say Mass Effect, but the way EA has come at Star Wars, I'll go with that. Granted, Star Wars fans are the worst, we hate ourselves. A true fan hates all the movies. Thanks guys, I hate you too. Arrow fans. 2 words. Felicity Smoke. Teen Titans. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Destiny, Bungie's fanbase. Coming from someone who has about 1,300 hours on Destiny 1 and still plays occasionally, Destiny 2 is a funless mess for me. Finished the campaign and played around 70 hours total, but I just can't find any incentives to keep me coming back to play. It makes me so sad to not enjoy it. Just look at the Destiny Reddit and it will show you how disappointed the fans are. It makes me really sad to see since I loved the series so much. The worst part is that Bungie isn't even listening to the players and are still doing what they want on their own time. A new update is supposed to come out and improve the game's basics and play speed, but I don't even think I'm going to bother trying it because it's not a big enough difference to keep me coming back. First Alien movie. Wow, that was good. Then Aliens. Okay, this was an 80s action flick, but still good. Alien 3? Wait. Alien 4? What? Prometheus. Oh, okay, new direction, I'm feeling it. And Alien Covenant. Ridley, stop, you have people who care about you. Berserk. No Man's Sky, at least just after its release. I was looking forward to the game and I enjoyed it when it came out. I was even a little surprised by the resounding disappointment surrounding the game at first, but you see, in the months leading up to its release, I watched all the gameplay videos with the volume muted. No commentary, no music, just video. I also hadn't seen the trailers and only watched them out of curiosity after the game was released. It was kinda like Sean Murray had studied all of the hype Peter Molyneux had built up for each game in the Fable trilogy, but then neglected the backlash. What do you think is going to happen when you build up hope for a hypothetical game but fail to deliver on any of your promises? A quick payday and a loss of trust from the community that hasn't been seen in the industry for years. So yeah, they betrayed the people they got excited for a game that they never planned to make. Luckily, they eventually redeemed themselves many years later, by completely changing the game. I came here expecting to see someone else writing about Firefly, and I'm leaving disappointed. So many intriguing arcs were set up that could have been deeply developed, from what exactly they made River, to Inara's illness and relationship with Mal, and his emotional growth. Also, more of Book's backstory than was resolved in The Shepherd's Tale. I'm glad we at least got Serenity to tie up some loose ends, but I constantly rue that show getting cut short. A few come to mind, to be honest. Avatar: The Last Airbender with that crappy movie adaptation, Eragon with an arguably equally crappy, if not even more crappy movie adaptation, Chronicle, for those who know that movie, by Fox, ruining a pretty amazing sequel script, Martyr, leaked what would have been a pretty good sequel in my opinion, and in turn trying to turn the franchise into a paranormal activity-like cash cow that ended up just tanking the franchise with no sequel release. and Halo fans with the garbage writing of the last two titles. This comment was written in 2017, and the narrator is laughing a little bit, because if what you were getting from Halo in 2017 was betrayal, what do you call that TV series from the last few years? Waiting until the grief at the betrayal had passed, turning up at your door in the middle of the night and then setting you on fire? Facebook. I'd definitely say that fans and supporters of it have been betrayed pretty badly, along with all other users. Half-Life fans. Seriously, it's like the fans did something to make Valve angry. The Miami Marlins. Fire sales after each of their World Series victories, then they fired Joe Giardi after he was named Manager of the Year and led them back to respectability in 2006. Then, after the city builds them a new stadium, they go right back to giving away all their stars this past winter. Written in 2017. Steven Universe. Hey, wasn't that a fun year-long hiatus? Here, have 4 new episodes in 1 week before your next year-and-a-half hiatus begins. Don't worry. While you wait, you can still watch reruns of all your favorite episodes of Teen Titans Go, literally all day, every day, with a new episode each week. I'm thinking Star Wars fans. After the prequels, Disney takes over and throws their entire extended universe in the trash, then regurgitates the first movie again and follows it with a sequel designed to shake things up by destroying what's left of their dogma. Fans of the Game of Thrones books. I've accepted my fate. I can't really get into the show despite devouring the books, and it's been so long since I've devoured the books that I've lost interest. Gargoyles. Awesome, before-its-time cartoon on Disney in 1992. It still has some of the most dedicated and crapped-upon fans in 2018. We got 2 amazing seasons right out of Greg Weisman's beautiful head before they ripped him off the show and gave us nonsense in Season 3. Greg tried to continue with comics that are released so sporadically that Steven Universe would cry, and with art that fan artists would laugh off of DeviantArt. All the while, dedicated cons are going on with people who love the series, still screaming for good content. For 25 frickin' years. Greg has an Ask Greg website where he has almost admitted every plot point in the series, and it is stuff of a writer's nightmares. With each question, he oscillates between hopeful, coy answers, making us think that something might be in the works for us, to depressing tell-alls, knowing that he's screaming his story into the wind. The best continuation, in my opinion, is this behemoth of a fanfiction site that wrote novels on every facet of the story, from Wyvern Castle to Current Timeline to Time Dancer to 2148. Glorious fan art, enchanting OCs, true-to-character depictions. Sata is better than Katana any day of the week, almost forgives the fanfic washing over the Lexington being gay thing, but it too is consumed by the void. Every year there's a rumor of a live-action movie, but every year it's live-action disappointment. For 25 frickin' years. System of a Down fans. We waited when the hiatus happened, we waited when they wanted to tour a bit with the old stuff after the hiatus ended, we were told an album was in the works and patiently waited, and now Surge is like, meh, I don't like singing anymore. Frick, dude, let the other 3 move on if you don't want to do it. You let us down every time one of the others has to say, Surge is the holdup. More like System of a Letdown, am I right? Call of Duty fans. Modern Warfare 2 remaster without multiplayer? Really? Paragon got absolutely messed over by Epic Games. Paragon was going okay. They released a new update called the Monolith Update, and it completely changed the game. No one liked it, but Epic Games continued to develop without listening to the Paragon community. One day they told us to all go try their new game, Fortnite. We all played it, and they even gave everyone who paid for Paragon Founders Edition a free copy of the paid Fortnite mode. Then 2 months ago, they announced the closing of Paragon due to it not being successful anymore. The game died because we helped them launch Fortnite and because they wouldn't listen to us when developing Paragon. They gave everyone a refund for their purchases, however, many people are having trouble getting their refunds. As an alternative to waiting for our refunds, we can immediately cash out in V-Bucks, fricking Fortnite currency. I am teed right the frick off and I'm out of this witch. Doctor Who. Stephen Moffat is the devil. Gamers. Companies think that they're doing a public service when they try to appeal to casual gamers, but this just creates vanilla games that flop because casual gamers never devote a substantial amount of time into any single game. Stop appealing to wider audiences and just make games gamers want to binge. I'm looking at you, Sea of Thieves. The narrator mostly agrees. That probably explains why almost all of his purchases end up being indie games these days. Time to go dip another few hundred hours into Stardew Valley. I loved SimCity growing up. I played 2000 all the time despite not understanding how zoning worked. Think about that. I'd play a game where I put down roads and police stations and schools, and didn't put down zones. That's crazy, but I loved the idea of building little working cities. As I got older, I moved to 3000, and I still consider it my favorite game of all time. I literally have the bound manual for 3000 on my nightstand right next to me now. I have some of the songs from the soundtrack on my phone because I like to listen to them when I ride the bus to work, because it reminds me that I live in a city just like the ones I used to build as a kid. The new SimCity was so misguided, I feel like I would have been less disappointed if they just rebooted it as a first-person shooter. Why is this always online? Oh, we need to offload the processing power to the internet to handle all the features, like how everyone in your city is an independent person. Yeah, that's a lie. And we proved it was a lie within like 24 hours of release. This is just to avoid piracy, isn't it? No, there's also the multiplayer. I don't really want to play multiplayer. Can I be offline when I play alone? No, there's a commodities market that impacts everyone. You wouldn't want to miss out on that, right? It's just a laundry list of bad decisions. Small city sizes, just a real lack of humor in the writing. It just feels like a game made by people that didn't understand what made SimCity great. It was pretty, and you could simulate a city. That's basically all they got right. Good night, sweet news ticker. I hope we'll talk about broccoli and llamas again in another life. Matrix fans. They promised it would be a trilogy and then never delivered. On the other hand, I was a little afraid that the new movies might ruin the original, so in a way, I'm glad they never came out. Anything Michael Bay has made a movie out of, Transformers and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles especially. Seriously, the man seems to make a hobby out of taking a dump on my childhood memories. What made a job candidate go from your best to your worst choice? Hiring a developer, I asked details about the languages he had on his resume. Oh, I don't actually know any of those, I put it on there to get an interview. The languages were obscure and he'd already passed the interview, and I was just genuinely curious how he had run into them. I walked him out immediately. He didn't get the job. I asked the applicant about their strengths, and they spoke about how result-focused they were. Going well so far, and then they started sharing examples of unethical things they did to get the job done, like bribing customers, sharing misleading information. Clearly, that was the end of that interview. My friend was doing first-round interviews and screening for a role when a guy from a dating app who had pumped, dumped, and ghosted just a few weeks earlier walked in from reception. Turns out he was using a fake name on his profile. She described it as an Abe Simpson moment where he walked through the door, had a sudden realization, did a 180 straight out the door without saying a single word. Well, at least he recognized her. It would be even worse if he had completely forgotten who she was. When I was becoming an assistant manager, I had to sit in on an interview. My boss took a look at the guy's resume and went into the usual line of questioning. At one point, he asked why the interviewee had left his previous job. The interviewee said he had quit. My boss then asked another series of questions which eventually caused this guy to slip up and say that he hadn't quit but rather he had been asked to leave. The interviewee got up and left once he realized he'd been caught in a lie. After he was gone, my boss turned to me and said something like, "You know, I saw the felony and alternative school and really wanted to give him a chance. He was doing fine until I caught him lying." Asked a warm-up question to an applicant and they went about it for 20 minutes without stopping or letting me interject to ask any of the main questions. At one point, I interrupted them and said something along the lines of, "Okay, that's great, let's move on to another topic," just to be told they weren't done. They hadn't gotten to the point yet, and then they proceeded to keep talking about the same thing for the remainder of the interview without me ever getting to ask any relevant questions. Ah yes, that valued skill that we all look out for in our hires, ignoring directives from above and steamrolling management when they try to put you back on task. I didn't think it was possible to try and filibuster in a job interview, but there you go. The candidate went on a 5-minute rant about his parents and how much he hated them. Not sure what set him off on that one, but crazy is not a good look. Good move. We had a guy in his 40s that we hired tell the room that he was going home to kill his parents because they decreased his allowance to $1,500 a month on top of paying his living expenses. The boss called the cops, the guy got pretty unruly, and the cops used their tasers. One day we were all talking about Walmart and this same guy asked what we were talking about. We thought he missed what store we were discussing, but it turns out he had no idea what a Walmart was. His parents were both successful surgeons or something like that, so he grew up extremely rich and didn't know about places like Walmart existing. I had an applicant tell me during the interview that her mother was outside and if she could now bring her mother in to chat some more. This applicant was interviewing for her first employment as a full medical doctor. I was going to mention something similar. I used to work at a place that was a bit far away and hard to find with little options for public transport. We were hiring for an entry-level position, so it wasn't rare that someone would show up with their mum or dad that drove them there for the interview and, having nowhere else to go, they'd be in the waiting room. That's understandable. One mum, though, did the speaking to the secretary herself, as in, "This is my daughter, we have an interview here today," and tried to enter the interview room herself and seemed annoyed that we asked her to wait outside. The girl herself wasn't bad, but since we had good options, we decided to go with someone a tad more independent. He spat into his hand and held it out for me to shake. What a rookie. He should know you're supposed to cut your palms and give a blood shake. We were interviewing for a comic shop sales position. This guy was going great. He has the vibe we like and he seems to really know his stuff. Then bam, he goes on a tangent about human puppas, puppy play, and the variations it can take. I'm not one to kink shame, but damn if that wasn't unprovoked. The panel asked him, "So, you put Industry 4.0 on your CV, so you have some knowledge about it."
Yes, I do.
"How do you think it could be applied here?" Cue 15 seconds of stupid face from the interviewee. So we ask again, "Where or how do you think it could be applied?" The interviewee starts spouting off some stuff about using CAD as if it was some amazing new thing. If you're going to put bullcrap on your CV, at least make sure you know something about the topic, like what it is for a start. I did some interviews for the help desk I worked at many years ago. It was some light technical questions followed by troubleshooting scenarios where you'd just walk us through how you'd solve a problem. One of the technical questions was, "Give an example of a browser plugin." The candidate proceeded to explain that a browser plugin was something you plugged into your computer to either sit on the monitor, like a webcam, or help you with your browsing, like a mouse and keyboard. They also missed all of the other questions we asked. On the plus side, they were very confident in the answers they gave us. I'm a young female software engineer, and I was interviewing this old-school 90s movie-type programmer guy who knew COBOL really well. I usually ask a tough algorithms problem, and I didn't really expect him to do well, but I was preparing to make the argument that he has so much real-world experience and could add some diversity to our collective skill sets and culture, so we should consider hiring him anyway. I start with an easy version of the problem, and it's fine, he doesn't do great, but I expected that. Then I start explaining the harder version of the problem, but before I could finish, he says the problems are exactly the same. I'm a bit taken aback, but I try to explain how the problem is different, and then he just starts yelling at me as to why he thinks the problem is the same. I sat down from the whiteboard and processed what had just happened in silence for a few minutes. If I felt I had the authority to end it there, I would have, but I didn't, so I attempted to continue. I work up the courage to start speaking again to try to help him, and as soon as the first sound comes out of my mouth, he immediately starts aggressively talking over me more of why he thinks the problem is the same, and asks in a very patronizing tone if I understand what he's saying. My boss gave me the authority to just end interviews in the future if they're being a jerk. The guy I interviewed was checking out my wife and asked whether she was single. This isn't my story, but I know of someone who was part of a committee hiring a new professor. At the final stage, they had 2 candidates they liked, so they took them both to dinner individually. Pretty standard in academia. The first guy did really well, but after the meal, he picked up his plate and started licking it. Licked it clean. The committee was pretty weirded and grossed out. The second guy also does well, but eventually he asks, "So, what's the university's policy on dating students?" The committee was like, "Well, I guess we're going with the plate licker." I was doing a basic boilerplate interview in 2009 for an entry-level position. Everything was going well until my last question. I tried to keep the last one kind of fun, but also try to get an idea of how they view money since their job is handling thousands of dollars a day in cash. So I asked them, if you had $1 million right now, what would you do with it? The normal and boring answer is to invest most of it and spend a little on stuff. This person's answer, well, it wasn't that. So I'd put about half away for my retirement, and the other half I'd invest into buying as many substances as I could so I could resell them. I have plenty of contacts, and the return on investment is pretty good if you buy bulk. Needless to say, that's a bit of a red flag. This is because people try and steal the daily deposit and buy and resell substances that night and then complete the deposit in the morning. It happens much more than you'd think. Assistant manager here. I was interviewing this one young man and he was doing solid till he said, "Man, that coworker of yours, I want to knock boots with her." Much like a video I did recently where we talked about bad first dates, I feel like we should appreciate these really bad applicants for showing such obvious signs from the get-go, rather than waiting until they're hired before destroying your office from within. I don't know how we should reward them, but I've got to say they're more preferable. My first professional job was an HR manager at a small factory. I was interviewing an applicant for a job in our quality control unit. During the interview, his cell rings and he stops the interview and takes the call. He ends the call and then tells me he just got another job offer and accepted the position. He proceeds to tell me his buddy is in the lobby and would be perfect for the job he was interviewing for with us. He wanted to get him to take his spot at the interview. I couldn't believe what I'd just witnessed. I declined to interview his buddy as he had not applied for the job. Some people are unreal. I don't interview applicants myself, but for one job they'd interview two of us at the same time for the same position, which was worker at a gas station. They asked questions, and for one I could answer first and then he'll answer the next one first, and so on and so forth. It's my first job interview ever, as I'd just finished high school, and the guy I was up against was more qualified in every way. So one question was, what would you do if you'd found out that our station manager is stealing stuff from the station or selling them to put money in his pocket? I said I'd report him to his supervisor. This company has a chain of stations in the country, and for every region there is someone who supervises the specific region. The same way we workers answer to gas station manager, he has to answer to his regional supervisor. They explained this all when they introduced us and told us about the company. The other guy's answer to the question was, "I'd blackmail the manager that if he doesn't include me, I'd report him." I'll finish with the fact that I was the one who actually got the job. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My department is a very male-dominated one, and I'm the only woman. I'm also the second stage of any interview to join us. It goes like the team leader talks to them, then I do, then the grand boss does. This one guy passed the section of the interviews conducted by men with flying colors. He then spent the entire section led by me staring at my chest. I was wearing a frickin' turtleneck. He was newly graduated, so we gave him some feedback about appropriate interview conduct and then hired a different candidate. It was going well until she suddenly said, "I don't know why people think interviews are so hard. Like, all you have to do is be normal for 10 minutes. Just don't talk about your downstairs herpes or whatever other transmissible disease you have." This was an interview for a residency position as a doctor. Not sure where she ended up, but it wasn't with us. An in-person interview for a copywriting position at a tech company. It went great until they asked me how much money I wanted. I'd never been in a position to negotiate before and was still fairly new to the industry. I had zero idea what my market value was, and they wouldn't give me a ballpark. I tried to play it off and say that I was more interested in the opportunity than the money, but they insisted that they needed a figure to work with and that they wanted to pay me fairly. I said some number that was in retrospect way too low, and the what the frick look on their faces just said it all. I could tell they weren't going to call me back after that. It would be like a software engineer sitting you down and telling you that $13 an hour sounds about right. You'd think something was seriously wrong with him or his work. My personal favorite, I said, "Can you tell me about a time you were faced with an irate or difficult customer?" The applicant told a story of working airport security. They encountered a traveler from the Middle East, there was a language barrier, a misunderstanding, and they tased the individual. Even the way they told the story couldn't make it sound like they were the one in the right. On top of that, they used racist language, including the N-word. Thank you for your time. About 20 years ago, I was working at a vocational school. New instructors were required to give a sample lecture as part of the interview process, and the other instructors would be the audience. We'd let them talk for a bit and then start interrupting with questions, easy ones at first and then getting harder until we decided they'd had enough. Usually they were judged not by their answers but by how they handled the question. One day we had a guy who chose to lecture on computer hardware. He started off okay until the questions started. When my buddy reached into a box, pulled out a hard disk and said, "What's this?" and the guy couldn't answer, the interview ended soon after. This one guy complained about how there were too many poofters at his current job in retail. I asked him to repeat himself and he laughed and said, "Well, you know what they're like." You should have seen the look on his face when I told him I was gay and I didn't think he'd be a good fit for the company. It's been 10 years, but it's so depressing to think that people think exposing their prejudices at an interview will help them. He started talking about anger management issues. We try to support mental health as much as possible, so this isn't an automatic no. We asked him how he copes with this. He said he shuts down, becomes withdrawn, and may be rude to colleagues and customers. Yeah, that's a no from me. This lady took a pass at the boss's husband and then turned to her and said, "You did well." Obligatory, not me, but a friend. She was interviewing to work at an animal shelter and was told at the end of the interview she basically had the job. When she went back to her car, there were cops around it and all the employees were out in the parking lot panicking. She'd left her dog locked in the car in a hot day. She never heard back from that place. Oh my god, that's really unfortunate. Lesson learned, I hope? It's entirely possible that we can pin this down to stupidity rather than not caring about her dog, but even if she was the most angelic, perfect person in the world, she had to have looked at this situation and said, "Yeah, you know what, I can see why I didn't get this one." Basically, they said all the right stuff, but were taking a while to answer each question. Then I noticed them texting someone. Turns out they were asking a friend for all the answers. Immediately turned them down, but that's some serious stealth texting though. I was interviewing someone to replace me in a finance position. Things were going well until I gave her a scenario and asked her how she'd turned that profitable, to which she replied, "I think if we don't reach that stage, we'll be fine." This soon-to-be college grad had passed 2 phone screens and was in the office going through our panel interviews for a software position. One of my engineers who was scheduled to interview him next came to my office. The engineer had decided to take a deep dive through the candidate's GitHub repos, a software engineer's public portfolio for you non-techies, as the basis for questions. The candidate was a person of color, but some of his personal projects were littered with incredibly derogatory and inflammatory language. Like multiple variables were variations of the hard R N-word, as well as LGBT slurs. I stopped the interview right there, walked him out, and sincerely encouraged him to clean up his public repos before applying to any other companies. It sucked too, because we all liked him and he was technically capable, and it seemed like it was just a dumb college kid's mistake on personal projects that he thought no one would ever look at. However, we can't risk anything like that happening in any of our code, and you never know what underlying issues could have caused those inclusions that the candidate needs help for. Hopefully, it was a wake-up call for him. Hiring for a writer position in legal marketing, looking at law students who usually jump at the opportunity because it's remote, pays well for a student and can be done on their own schedule. One candidate had some pretty decent experience in the field we were looking at, not a bad personality it seemed, and took a funny question in stride. Then, when he was asked about his writing experience, stated, "I'm not really a strong writer, I don't really like it." This was for a writer position. Doesn't like writing. Isn't good at writing. She seemed nice, and then she said, "One of my references is going to say really nice things about me, you'll see. She's my best friend, my high school guidance therapist." This lady was 24. Then she claimed she'd need a month off for her honeymoon. He hadn't proposed yet, but she's gone over to his house on the first date, so it's getting serious quickly. We respectfully didn't hire her. There was this one guy I liked, but my boss didn't. I would have hired him though. He said he was lazy, probably more lazy than anyone they'd ever met. But he was also driven and a bit of an expert in his area. This means, in his words, that he'll always find a way to do a task faster and with less effort, but with better results. I was interviewing a guy for an IT job at a healthcare-related company a few years ago. Things were going great until the end of the interview when he informed us that something was going to come up on his background check, so he was just going to come clean about it now. He proceeded to tell us that he was fired and prosecuted for stealing intellectual property and company confidential data. Needless to say, we didn't end up hiring him. Application was really good, phone interview was going well, open availability and eager to start. We used to ask, "Can you pass a substance test and a background check?" It's not a question we ask anymore, but one applicant back in the day responded with, "Due to some questionable life choices over the weekend, I won't be able to pass either for the foreseeable future." This phone interview happened on a Wednesday. Happened about a year ago when I was 21 trying to grow a telemarketing team for a tech startup. mostly interviewing people around my age, maybe a few who were a couple of years older. But then I interview a man who was over double my age, and the whole interview was him trying to ask me questions about my role, my experience, and my age. I understand it was probably a shock for him to be interviewed by someone so young, but it was even more off-putting for me. He didn't really fit with the vision of our team, but we did have another position we looked to put him in, but that position was then filled by someone else as well. I interviewed for a job and it went well. Well, up to the point where I asked about the hours. The interviewer said that they started at 8:30, but most people were in the office by 8. He tried to make out that this was a good thing as they had a committed team. I was offered the job, but I turned it down because screw that. If they pay me for the hours I work, I'll work hard, but if they're going to try to squeeze extra from me right from the start, then screw them. Every retail job I had as a teenager was like this. Work starts at 5, but you have to be there by 4:30 so you can be on the floor at 4:45. But don't clock in until 5. Don't stand around waiting to clock in either. You have to be working. Work ends at 11 p.m., but you have to sit there for no reason until the cashiers cash out, and we all leave as a group for no reason. It takes about an hour. I didn't stay there long. I tell every young person I know to tell the boss they won't be taken advantage of like that and to quit on the spot. Learn to stand up to that crap when you're a kid and you can afford to quit. From some of my experience, I've learned don't make jokes. You can try to make something funny that's already happened, but don't go stand-up comedy mode. You'll probably flop. I can tell a story from my mum, who in her career did some interviews. Everything went well until the interviewed person repeatedly said the word internship wrong while applying for an internship. At first she thought that person just made a mistake, but then she began to realize that he genuinely didn't know what an internship was. Okay, English isn't my first language and I don't know how you could say internship wrong, but in my language it's practicum, and the person said praxis. These words don't really sound the same but come from the same family. In the police, we had one applicant who did well during the fitness test and the interview board. Prior military and a 4-year degree as well. We put him at the top of the list and was slotted for the next academy. During the polygraph, he lied about the animal mistreatment questions. When we asked him about a possible error, he told us that he used to have relations with his female German Shepherd. He was not hired for obvious reasons. What event caused a real-life butterfly effect for you? My mother wore heels to work and slipped on the carpeted steps, resulting in a broken high heel and a broken leg. While she was home recovering, she somehow developed allergies that led to her needing an inhaler to dose herself with penicillin. The inhaler interfered with her birth control, and now I have a brother 13 years younger than me. Nearly every single friend I have in college is because one day in my Gen Ed health class, we had to pick a seat that would become our seat for the semester. When I came in, there weren't many seats left, and the people I sat next to ended up becoming my best friends and introduced me to all of my other friends in one way or another. I'm alive because my aunt was born. My grandfather was conscripted into the Romanian army as a medic, and his unit was one of the many acting as a defensive barrier covering the German supply lines to Stalingrad. My aunt was born and he was called back to Bucharest from the front. While he was on leave, the Russians launched Operation Uranus, which decimated the Axis forces. He received word that his unit had been completely destroyed. He was never reassigned, and in 1948, my mother was born. I'm also alive because a bunch of Romanian cows got sick. My other grandfather was a pharmacist, back when that meant actually making medicines, and he was also Jewish. The town he lived in was largely agrarian, and their cow herds came down with some illness that was killing them. He whipped up something that cured them. The townspeople were very grateful to him. So grateful that when the chief of police heard that the Germans were coming to town to take inventory of who lived there, he came to my grandfather's house with some train tickets for him and his wife. They escaped the Third Reich and never got caught. My father was born at the end of 1945. Actually, you know what? I guess this is the opposite of the butterfly effect. Rather than one small action blowing up into a much more important chain of events, two hugely improbable events eventually led to my birth and obviously my extended family as well. And now, well, I work running ads on the internet. I was going out to grab pizza and a case of beer for me and my roommate, but he texted me that he had a stomach thing, so I walked to a restaurant and ordered dinner at the bar and met a girl there. And now we're married and have 2 kids because my roommate had diarrhea. I can totally see a child telling the short version of this story to someone who doesn't really care, but the kid just hears it and repeats, "My dad married my mom because his roommate has diarrhea." That is clearly the best and only way to describe how they met. Children are the best at getting to the heart of these sorts of things. If only the best man at their wedding had given that specific speech. So my then girlfriend and now wife were planning on going away traveling for a very long time. Several years, in fact. The night before we left, I was just packing my things, and at the last minute I decided to include some camera stuff. I had an SLR that I didn't really use too much. I very nearly didn't bring it because it was big and space was at a premium. While we were away, one of the things that we did was work in a wildlife rehab center. At the time we were there, it was very quiet. Very few baby kangaroos to look after. But we had to be ready as that could change in an instant. Like, in one day, 3 could come in and boom, full-time job. I used my spare time to really get to grips with the camera and learn about photography in general. Now, I'm a wildlife cameraman. Had I decided to leave my camera, I'd never be doing what I'm doing, which is sitting in a freezing cold shed for hours at a time, waiting for some animals to do something that they're not doing. High school. I didn't get into the advanced placement history class I wanted, changed up my schedule, including a different gym class without everyone I knew. I was heartbroken. I really wanted to teach, and without an AP class senior year, I was screwed. I made a new friend in gym class who was wearing a volunteer firefighter shirt. He had just joined. Seemed interesting and he invited me to check it out. They paid for me to get my EMT. I fell in love with healthcare. Fast forward quite a bit and I'm an ER nurse and precept students and new nurses, teaching them how to survive in the ER. I also do public outreach and injury prevention, and I love it. I'm glad I missed out on my AP history class. If my biological mum hadn't asked her parents to watch me for a couple of hours and then left town, I wouldn't have had the incredible and privileged life that I was given through adoption. My younger half-brothers were raised by our biological mum and they're a total frickin' mess. I'm more of a mum to them than their actual mum, and I would have been an absolute wreck as well if she'd kept me. Instead, I was given an amazing private education, all the sports and musical adventures, and most importantly, a healthy, loving home with 2 parents who taught me that just because you share blood doesn't mean you share love, and just because you didn't give birth to a child doesn't mean you can't be their parent. The wife and I were having dinner in Hawaii one night on vacation. As we were getting up to leave, I noticed she hadn't finished her beer. I told her she should finish the beer since we paid some ridiculous price for it. Fast forward 30 seconds and we leave the restaurant and we're walking the 3 blocks back to the hotel. About 50 feet in front of us as we're walking down the sidewalk on the left side of the road, a car comes flying out of a side street from the right and crashes through the street, hops the sidewalk in front of us and smashes into a wall. If she didn't finish her beer, we would have been smoked by the car and most likely squished between the car and the wall. We always finish our beer now. If you hadn't drank at all, you could have had an action movie scene with a car crashing behind you as you casually walked down the street. I mean, it's only cool if the car explodes afterwards. I was walking to school and got distracted by a hedgehog that ran into a bush next to me, and then a big tree branch fell in front of me and would have crushed me if I didn't get distracted by that spiky little mouse scurrying into the bushes. I gave him a dead cricket the next day and he took it and ran off. Godspeed, spiky mouse. At the end of 6th grade, my class took a field trip on whale watch. That night I saw a commercial for a documentary TV series on whales. Ever since that day I wanted to grow up and protect whales from being hunted. Today I work in the military specializing in marine preservation. Cool! I didn't even know the military worked in marine preservation. My brother spent a career as a Navy corpsman, a medic, and for 23 years of his life he was trying to preserve Marines from their own stupidity. Everything from bullet wounds and major contusions to heart attacks to venereal disease. As it was with the Marines, I suspect there were a few cases of crayon poisoning and more than one marble up the nose too. The Navy definitely invests in marine preservation. Getting my ears pierced the day after I graduated high school got me where I am today. I worked at McDonald's at the time and was scheduled to work that night. Before my shift, my girlfriend at the time convinced me to get my ears pierced. Well, when I showed up to my shift with those clear ear studs in, my manager gave me an option: either take them out or go home. Being only 17 and not taking anything seriously, I went home. On the way home, I called that girlfriend's dad and asked if I could work with him laying tile. He gave me a chance, and I quit McDonald's that day. Worked with him for about a year until the 2008-09 recession caused us to run out of work. I got laid off. 4 months later, I landed a job in a new hospital doing admitting in the emergency room. Did that for 2 years before I got my phlebotomy certification. Been doing that for a few years and now I'm in my final semester of nursing school. I attribute everything I've done to that day my ex-girlfriend pressured me into getting my ears pierced. Who knows how long I would have stayed at McDonald's. Received an incredibly high-paying job offer to run our biggest competitor's team. I told my boss, even though I loved my job, but it was more than double what I was making. My boss agreed to a reasonable raise, still nowhere near the offer. I decided to stay because I genuinely loved my team and co-workers, and the money wasn't enough to leave that happy place. In exchange, I had to take up another account that meant a business trip I didn't have in the plans. I went on that trip and met my future husband. A couple of years later, we went on our honeymoon at a new resort in St. Lucia. Ran into someone I knew from home and work. Turns out, the team that I'd been given the job offer for had made so much money that they'd booked the same resort to celebrate. I sat there and went, wow, life is nuts. I would have ended up there either way. Well, this might be the opposite of what we were asking here, as apparently no matter if you'd chosen to quit both jobs and throw your life into turmoil, you were destined to meet your partner and be in that exact resort at the exact same time. Sweet though. In short, I was just out of high school and new in town with no job. I was living off what savings I had left, and my account went below zero without me knowing. I was overdraft charged like 10 times and I owed $300. I went down to the bank and spoke with a teller, and she ended up being a lifesaver. She worked with me and got all the charges removed. On top of getting the charges removed, we got to talking about my situation, and she said that her son worked at a local restaurant and she had helped me get a job. She was a woman of her word, and by the end of the week I was working full-time. Fast forward, I met a cool dude who worked there, we became friends. I introduced him to my sister, they fell in love, got married, and had 2 kids. His best friend came into town for the wedding, and I introduced him to my roommate at the time. They fell in love, got married, and had 2 babies. I also got my best friend a job at the restaurant where he met a girl working there. They fell in love, got married, and had a kid. Right before I left, I got my roommate a job at the restaurant where he met a customer, fell in love, got married, and had a kid. As a bonus, my best friend, who I helped get the job, repaid the favor and got me a job at a different restaurant where I met a girl, fell in love, and got married. In short, I overdrafted and caused 5 marriages and 6 babies. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Went to a soccer match on a Thursday night in August 2010, after years of turning down invites from multiple groups of friends. But this time it was for someone's birthday and they gave me a ticket, so I said, what the hell, okay. I fell in love with my local team. I'd watched soccer in high school and college, and of course the World Cup, but this was different. I rekindled friendships from years before through our mutual support of said team. Made new friends, experienced new things because of friends and the team, drank more than I usually did. In January 2016, I got laid off from a job I'd grown to hate after 8 years and a lot of rounds of layabouts, just waiting for my number to be called. That March, I was getting antsy and bored at home because I was trying to save money while still looking for work, and decided to get off my couch and go to an off-season supporters group meeting, which I usually don't like to do because I'm not good at social skills, and if I hadn't been unemployed, I know I wouldn't have gone. But that night I met the woman I instantly knew I was going to fall in love with. I got a new job, quit drinking, finally went on a date with her 6 months after meeting her, figured out I hated the new job, quit said job, moved to her city 35 minutes south in 2017, and have been working odd jobs part-time and doing gig economy stuff. I moved in 6 months later. We had a puppy magically fall into our lives within 3 days of just talking about maybe getting a dog, and it's my first dog ever, and I'm so happy about it. Got engaged, got married in December, and I'm so happy. We also just got a kitten. I don't know if this counts, but during the Sri Lankan Civil War, my dad and his family were chased out of their home and were forced to seek shelter at his cousin's house a couple of towns over. His cousins only had one neighbor, and that neighbor was my mum and her family. They used to meet up at the fence dividing their lawns and talk for months. One of the pictures from their wedding was them at that fence. When I was 18, I had a girlfriend, and her older brother owned a small company. He said to me, "You know, I think you'd be pretty good at this job. I'm 34 now and have a legitimate career that I love because I dated a girl for a bit. I also had a cat for the better part of that time period because of the girlfriend. I'm a cat person now." This happened 2 days ago. It was early in the morning, and as I was about to leave for work, my mum reminded me that I forgot my water bottle on the table while I was walking out. For whatever reason, I decided to go back, leave my backpack in the car, and then walk back into the house for the water bottle. Well, that took about maybe 10 seconds total. It started to rain heavily on my way to work and I couldn't see very well. But I noticed the brake lights of the cars ahead stopping suddenly and some moving off onto the shoulder and decided to slow down and put the hazard lights on for the people behind to slow down. Well, turns out everyone was braking because a 4 or 5 car accident had just happened seconds before. All the cars were scattered across the highway, spread across the left and right shoulders, and another had hit the crash barrier. Basically a total mess. The drivers were still in their cars, I guess processing what had just happened. After seeing it, I immediately started to think that if I hadn't gone back for the water bottle, there's a chance I could have easily been in that accident, or at least even closer to it. It tripped me out for the rest of the day. The crazy thing about random variables is had you actually been at the point where the accident occurred, you might have been the one element that stopped it or at least saved someone from a wreck. Maybe you're more attentive than the other drivers and gave enough warning? I guess we'll never know, and really, I blame that accident on your water bottle. Almost everything that's happened in my life for the past 8 years is a direct result of me literally flipping a coin to decide between 2 colleges. I play the sport I do, have the friends I do, and am dating the person I am, and very nearly every other aspect of my life because a nickel landed on heads. Alright there, Harvey Dent. I should say to everyone watching, please don't make every choice in your life based on random chance. Only resort to it like this if the 2 colleges are completely, absolutely equally appealing to you. Then, after the proper research and forethought, why the heck not flip a coin, I guess. I procrastinated one day in high school by watching a foreign musical on YouTube. I ended up trying to learn the lyrics and eventually the language. That led to me discovering the field of linguistics, which I'm now majoring in. I don't know what I'd be doing now had I actually started doing my homework that day instead. Just last month, a friend of mine told me a story from his recent heartbreak. He, let's call him Mickey, had been with this girl Minnie for almost 4 years when, out of nowhere, she told him she was leaving him and moving out. He had no idea the relationship was in jeopardy, but she dipped. Anyway, a few weeks went by, Mickey was hanging out with a co-worker of his who he had just recently met and ends up back at his place just to hang out. On the fridge, he sees a note in Minnie's handwriting. The note detailed several issues in Mickey and Minnie's relationship, and so Mickey asks his new friend where he found this note. Turns out this new buddy had gone to the same music festival as Mickey and Minnie a few months prior. The friend had found the note on the ground on the parking lot and thought, wow, what a sad and angry note. I'm going to keep this because it's so raw and interesting. The next day, Minnie came over to pick up some of her things. Mickey produced the note and it led to a long, tear-filled conversation about their relationship and what went wrong. They didn't end up together because, despite the pseudonyms I've given them, this is no Disney story. However, the resulting discussion helped them both achieve closure in a meaningful way, all because a random coworker kept and found a discarded note in a festival parking lot. I suffered with sack pain for a week or so to save a life. When I was a kid, my family went from the UK to visit my auntie who worked as a nurse in Germany. Being obsessed with Lego at the time, I was excited to be getting to go to the original Legoland in Denmark on the Friday of the week for the weekend. Cue waking up to crippling pain in my groin early in the week. After assuming it was just strain and waiting a few days, on Thursday I was given the choice of going to Denmark the next day or heading to the hospital and staying. I chose the hospital since I was in that much pain. Turns out there wasn't anything to do but take painkillers and chill. When it got round to the Saturday, my aunt went out to get me some Lego to cheer me up. Her and my brother stopped at a swimming pool for a while on the way back, where she was throwing some of those weight toys that they got from the toy store into the pool for him to dive down and get. Some German teenagers were taking the toys, so my auntie tried to shout at them in broken German. So they left to a deserted part of the pool. Next minute, they pull out a toddler from the pool completely unconscious. The lifeguards apparently had no clue what they were doing and were trying to call an ambulance, so my aunt stepped in and performed CPR until the kid got airlifted to a hospital. A week or so later, my pain had subsided, so we headed back to the pool. A woman came over to ask for some chairs in German, and my mum said, "Sorry, we're English." And the woman asked in English instead. She turned back around and said, "You wouldn't by any chance happen to know the English nurse that saved a little boy last week?" And my mum replied, "Yes, it's my sister." The woman said it was all over the local news that this anonymous English nurse saved the boy's life, and she wouldn't have been in the country if we were in Denmark at the time, let alone be at the pool sending away the teens to find the kid and then saving him. I still have never felt more glad to get a pain in my nads. When I was at college, I had this buddy who I used to give a ride to and from campus each day because we lived a couple of streets apart. One morning, I got Goldfinger, the ska band, not the Bond movie, playing on my CD player in my car. He had never heard them before, really dug it, and asked me about them. It was the day before Easter break, and he was all like, "Cool, I'll check them out." Cut to 2 weeks later, he's telling me how he's bought all their records, got his long-distance girlfriend into them when he visited her, and has basically listened to nothing but them since we spoke about it. I felt good for helping a buddy discover his new favorite band, but thought nothing more of it. That summer, me and this dude have a falling out. Long story, but the short of it is that he screwed me out of nearly £1,000, and a bit later, I stopped seeing him around. After a while, a mutual friend told me he'd dropped out and moved away. The next summer, a friend of mine asks me if I want a ticket to see Real Big Fish that evening. His sister was supposed to go, but is really sick and can't. I say, sure, and tag along. We get there and it turns out the support band is Goldfinger, which is pretty cool. So we're standing there, having a beer in between bands, and I clumsily knock some girl who's walking past's drink out of her hand. I turn and apologize and offer to buy her a replacement. While we're waiting at the bar, we get to talking and we're getting on pretty well. Me and my friend end up hanging out with her and her sisters the whole night, having a great time, and me and this girl end up exchanging numbers. Cut forward again a couple of years, me and said girl have been together basically since that night. We're moving in together and it's going really great. The night we move in together, we're sitting amongst all of our boxes of crap on the only seats that are unpacked, and I say something like, "Imagine if I hadn't taken my friend's offer to go to that Real Big Fish show that night. We'd have never met." She's then like, "Not only that, imagine if you hadn't bumped into me and we hadn't got to talking. Our original plan that night was to leave after Goldfinger played, as they were the only band we were bothered about seeing." I commented something about how I really liked them or something, I forget what, and then I ask how she got into them. I'm paraphrasing, but the long and short of it was, "Oh, my sister got me into them. Her D-bag ex-boyfriend got her into them. They were long distance while she studied in the US. They used to go to shows together when he would visit. He's actually from round here, I think." Yep. Same dude that I used to give rides to. Bonus butterfly effect, my buddy who was with me at that show actually ended up marrying the sister in question last year. In short, managed to set myself and a buddy up with serious relationships just by introducing some random dude who I used to give a ride to school to a band that I liked. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.